And as it always goes, let's make sure that we actually are live. It says we are. Cool.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Hello and welcome to another live stream. Today have quite a few guests, just as normally, and we'll be discussing the need of scholarly involvement with not just YouTube, but new media in general, but a bit specifically about YouTube. Today's panel covers a fairly diverse set of folks in terms of where they are in their careers and their relationship to scholarship and media. People are already talking about our backgrounds. So there's a lot of division over this, and I'm sure we're going to disagree on a number of things in terms of how much academia should be involved, where museums and other kinds of public history are involved, what a historian's duty is, and generally the role of new media in general. On the panel, we have a student who is getting their PhD, two professors, a teacher and my father, who is a retiree now, but somebody who has worked in public history quite a bit on their own, and the person who actually kind of prompted this entire thing with his own episode, Atunche, who has actually coming at YouTube from a filmmaking background, but has brought a whole nother level of cinematography and scholarship to YouTube. So I just want to go around first of all and give everybody a chance to introduce themselves. For the people who have channels besides my father, who is right next to me right on the screen, that direction. Besides him, everybody else has a channel which is linked in the description below. I highly encourage everyone to go and check those out. So I'll just start with myself about where I'm coming at this from. So I should probably full screen myself while I talk about myself. There we go. So where I'm coming from is I've talked about the need for more scholarly involvement on YouTube a number of times. I've actually made videos about it, but I've also kind of started pushing back against it as well because of just the horrendous way that YouTube treats their creators, especially in the education space. About myself, I am a PhD student working on my dissertation, so I'm what's called all but dissertation, or ABD. I am a doctoral student, and I specialize in violence on the American West, and I've been on YouTube since 2013 doing this whole thing. I'm sure most of the people on here will be familiar with my channel, so I don't really need to explain that. But I also teach at the college level, so I'm not technically a professor. I am what's called a lecturer or instructor. But we do have a couple professors on here. So let's move on from me to my father, who has quite a bit of experience for himself. So without further ado, here's my dad.
Well, my background, I'm Mark Hall-Patton. I'm retired from 44 years in the museum field. My background is a BA in history and graduate work in museology, which is actually a field that is the science of running museums. I've run museums in California, founded the Anaheim Museum, started out at Bowers Museum, did my graduate work at the University of Delaware, of all places, under one of the founders of the field of museology, a fellow named Ed Alexander. ran the museums in San Luis Obispo for 8 years, did the first exhibit on the history of women in Los Angeles, was with the museums in Sioux Falls, South Dakota for 3 years, and just retired from 27 years of running the museums here in Clark County, Nevada. That's Las Vegas. Here I became much better known for being involved with television, though I started working with television in 1984 when I was founding the Anaheim Museum. But when Pawn Stars started, what's that?
I wasn't even born yet.
Oh, no. I'm sorry, son, you weren't here. But his mother and I have been married for 42 years, so we were together. And his mother is a professor of sociology at UNLV. But, you know, I got involved with Pawn Stars right at the beginning and have always taken the idea that any way that I could reach out and talk about history, I would take that chance and I would get out there and do it. With Pawn Stars, I got the opportunity to reach out through a show that I thought nobody would watch and turned into a show that's on in 151 countries and turned into a huge phenomenon. And I've ended up on 25 other television shows around the world and continue to do that even as somebody in retirement, and believe in the idea of taking any kind of media out there. Though, you know, YouTube is something where I'm on YouTube, but not as somebody who has done what all these other guys on this have done, which is create their own channels and create their own content and using something that it didn't exist when I got in the field. So it's something kind of new and different to me, but not different from the idea of trying to take whatever's available and take it out to people to make history available.
So let's go with Atunche next.
I'm sorry, should have handed it off to you.
Oh, that's okay. Y'all know me, know how I make a living. So I'm a filmmaker by trade. I started a channel in 2016. I started making regular videos in 2018. What I've and you know, I'm the Checkmate Lincolnites guy. I do the funny voices. That's me. So it's interesting what Mark was saying. You know, I definitely feel like you're really kind of onto something, and that's how I approach my work as well. Is just sort of using whatever medium is available, right? It's just sort of seizing on just kind of what it is. And I'm sure if I were, you know, around in the 80s, you know, I would have tried to get into television as well, you know, and sort of just seize upon the medium that is available in order to educate and in order to sort of entertain, I guess. But yes, one thing I think where I might be different from the rest of you guys in this discussion is that I kind of had to sort of teach myself a lot of just kind of how to do history. You know, I mean, even something as simple as just citing your sources. You know, that was something that was not just having never taken a history class at a university level. That's just something that I didn't know when I started. I did not know that how crucial that was, or so many of the other kind of steps were. And a lot of, and I learned, sort of took a lot of my cues initially by sort of imitating other history channels. And I thought, oh, well, most of them don't cite their sources or, you know, do much due diligence at all. So neither do I. And sort of, you know, I kind of learned later that's a problem. Like, that's not a good thing, you know, that the vast majority of a lot of information out there is bad, and just doesn't, you know, that the people aren't, you know, they're just saying, oh, trust me, take my word for it, it's fine, rather than sort of saying, here's where I got this information, please look into it for yourself. I am not, you know, the be all end all about this. So yeah, so I think that sort of aspect is pretty interesting, and so I kind of had to teach myself all that. But thankfully, I've been able to sort of connect with some of you guys as well. And you know, David, we've worked together on videos and stuff. You know, kind of, I've been lucky enough to kind of fall in and sort of find a home with other, you know, educators here on YouTube who are very committed to those sorts of things, committed to providing good information, committed to transparency, and you know, and sort of rigorous education, if that makes sense. But I'll hand it off to Matt. Oh.
All right. Well,
hey there. Yeah, my name is Matt Beat, but on the internet they know me as Mr. Beat, and in the classroom, I'm also Mr. Beat. Go figure. I consider myself still a student, although I have been teaching the last 12 years, both middle school and high school, pretty much 7 through 12. And I started out, my first career was actually in broadcasting. So a lot of people don't realize that teaching was a third career for me. And my second career was a valet manager, which does not make any sense at all with everything else. But yeah, so I was in TV and radio for a while, and I loved it, but it just was not steady work, and the opportunities weren't quite there that I wanted. And eventually I went back to school. So my first degree was in journalism. I went back to school, got another degree in education when I decided I wanted to be a teacher. But meanwhile, I had still been, you know, messing around with videos on the side just for fun. And once I started student teaching, I quickly realized that I needed to make educational videos myself, because just a quick search online, especially on YouTube, the platform we're currently on, there wasn't much out there. In fact, I would search common events in history that you would, you know, part of almost every curriculum. And you would find, this was back in 2009, so way back, you would find student projects. And so I was like, well, I can do better than that. And my very first video was about the Compromise of 1850. I should probably sing it. Compromise of 1850. Yeah, I have weird little gimmicks like that to get my
was
students.
that song all the way from 2009?
Yes, that's what. Although I will say, I didn't publish it to the world until 2011, because when I started my channel in 2009, all the videos were private, you know, like it was just for my classroom. I didn't think anyone else would want to see it. Why would anyone else want to see this crap? But yeah, eventually in 2011, I started publishing them for other teachers started using them. And then over the years, the channel kind of slowly grew. And now it's turned into pretty much a full-time job on top of teaching and other things. I do a podcast as well, a history podcast called Jobsolete. But I've combine my passions for just video production and educating young folks who are, I just like, it seems like this has been like, you know, YouTube didn't even exist when I was in college the first time. And what's like all of us here tonight, like it's amazing what it's become, because I really feel like it's become a very powerful way for people to learn anything. Like I've learned so much from YouTube, and I've made it my life mission now to like continue to trick people into learning history. that's what keeps me going. But yeah, I'll stop.
So, but also in terms of your approach to like getting other people to do YouTube, you know, you have been right at the forefront of that, especially with We Created You and that. So, you know, I want to put that out yourself.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh,
supposed to also be saying like what our approach is towards like. The public.
So, I mean, I think in general, I think we found each other through like the main actually. Mark here, not Cypher's dad, but the other Mark here. We met through an organization called We Created You, and there's another group of us history YouTubers. I call us all edutubers that have all found each other, you know. And it's been great because a lot of us do come from backgrounds like I forgot to say I do have a master's in history. Like I've actually studied this stuff in depth. It's not like I'm just some random dude. And so I think a lot of us have kind of, it's been trial and error, like us just bouncing things off of each other because this is so new. Like, I think even, a lot of YouTubers who are educational YouTubers, they don't have any pedagogical, whatever skills at all. Like, they don't know how to, and so like being able to learn how to reach an audience that just typically doesn't read books. That's been a huge thing.
Yeah.
And that is a very powerful thing. And I mean, history, we'll actually get into like what the term history tuber is and all that. I saw one person in the comments asked already, so we'll get to that in just a second, but let's finish introducing everyone. So let's go with Mark next.
Yeah, I'm Mark Sundram. I'm come from the academic side of things. So my training has been as a medievalist. I did all my graduate work in medieval studies, particularly focusing on early medieval England, and with a particular attention to historical linguistics. So I did a lot of Old English as well as other languages like Old Norse and Latin, medieval Latin, and a bit of Middle English as well. And I've been teaching in the university classroom for almost 20 years now, I guess 18 years. At the same time, I also, started a YouTube channel a number of years ago, alliterative, also known as The Endless Knot, because I'm terrible at branding, and in which I talk about where words come from and how they change over time, and it's very rooted in the historical influences on how language and culture changes. And as a YouTuber, as is mentioned, I met a couple of these guys through the We Create EDU collective of edutubers. And I help run it. I'm currently the president of this group. And what we do is try and assist and promote edutubers in all fields, everything from history to sciences to social sciences to whatever. And so that is a definite sort of passion of mine, trying to promote YouTube as an educational platform, and try and help creators achieve their goals. So that is something that is very important to me.
And then let's go to David.
Yes. Well, I am a fellow originally from Buffalo, New York area, and I got into history roundabout. I didn't actually start majoring in history right away. I started out computer science, hated it. Then I did communications and media arts, which I liked, but I ended up switching to history. I thought that a history job might be a little bit more stable, and but anyway, so that's how I got into history. And I was originally just going to do high school social studies or something like that, and but the more courses I took in college as I was learning, I was like, I'm going to go all out. I'm just going to go all the way. And I went and I got all the way to PhD, and I chose to do ancient history. That's my thing, ancient history. And because I just love the old stuff, I guess. The older the better. It's I don't know, it's more distant, it's more alien. I don't know. It's something about it that's very attractive. And so that's what I did. And you probably know where I'm going with this because I have an ancient history YouTube channel. Yes, I got my my bachelor's in classics at SUNY Buffalo, and then I got my master's and then my PhD at University of California, San Diego. And my emphasis was on the ancient Near East, but I have since then branched out into basically world ancient history, and I basically do anything. I love ancient history, no matter what country you're talking about. So And that's my YouTube channel started because I well, for a couple different reasons. One, I just saw people were doing YouTube channels. I thought it'd be cool to do a YouTube channel. I wonder what I should do it on, And this is not many people. I don't know if anyone knows this on here, but I did an experimental YouTube channel first that wasn't history. I just thought I'd try something, and I did a channel on Doctor Who.
Nice.
Yeah, the TV show, which is still up there, by the way. But anyway, it's got like 200 subscribers.
Let me Google this real quick.
It's called Across the Whoniverse. Yeah. Anyway,
Nice.
so it's kind of embarrassing. But then I wanted to go all out with the channel and just put my all into it, right? So I decided to do ancient history because that's my thing, And I mean, I got a PhD in it. It should be good for something, right? So that's what I did. And but little did I know what I really wanted to do with the channel. And I actually have been doing this, but it was my main goal with the channel. And that is, I'm going to travel around the world and show people all the ancient ruins. And I'm going to talk about the ancient ruins. And it's going to be so much fun. I'm going to be like the Rick Steves of ancient history, right? That was the idea.
And then 2020.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
But also, I wanted to do other videos that I could just whip up at home,
Yeah.
And so when I'm flipping through YouTube, this is even before I had my channel, and I'm looking at, ancient history. Look at an ancient history video. Cool. Let's see what it's about. And they're talking about Atlantis and aliens. And I was like, no, that's not, no. And I'm like, no. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to do some rebuttal videos on some of this stuff. Because actually, in ancient history, those channels get all the views. They're the ones they're the popular ones, So, so I started doing videos on that, and they're my more popular videos. People love those the best. They love it when I do the debunking videos there. So, just kind of fell in my lap, but so that's what my channel's kind of about. It's called World of Antiquity. Check it out if you haven't yet.
And so we all, as you can see, this panel has quite a diversity of scholarly backgrounds. So this discussion is going to be mostly aimed at how we can get scholars involved with YouTube or new media, or actually what are the problems with that as well, because there's myriad problems with YouTube as a platform. But we can also talk about Twitter and other things along those lines, although none of us are, particularly big Twitter personalities or anything.
I can add one thing on that. I have at least 4 fake Twitter feeds on Twitter. I don't have one, but there are at least 4 fake ones.
I actually tried to get one of those taken down recently, and it didn't work.
Yeah, and one of them's in Spanish. I don't speak Spanish. So if you become known, watch for those, because they do come up and they will be there. And it will be something that'll happen, I'm sure, with your channels, that those kinds of things will happen. And I think that is something that will come into play with the whole conversation that we're having, because it's part of the fear that happens around people stepping out of the ivory towers and into the popular world.
Yeah, and we definitely are going to have to talk about the drawbacks, because while I think all of us here are like, make a YouTube channel already, do it. Except for maybe though, Dad, I do want you to eventually make at least a podcast.
Yes, well, I've been on 3 since I retired.
This is secretly to get him to make a podcast already. But we have folks I have to remember that this is mirror image, so I have to point that way.
Yeah, that's throwing me off too.
Yeah, but my dad on this side right here, it has a lot of old media experience, as opposed to new media. While yes, you've been on podcasts and whatnot, you haven't done anything yourself. You've actually, I don't know if the Barnstorming series is something that you can call that something you produced, but
I did. Okay,
so you technically produced it.
Yeah, I did 52 short videos that I wrote and produced and did all that.
So you've actually done like the production side in old media.
Yeah.
Whereas everybody else here has been doing new media, and that's why I wanted to have you on this panel is to kind of show that difference, and also that like this is something that we're not just like make a YouTube channel because it's fun. It's as Atanche said in his video, while yes, you're going to deal with some absolute bull doing YouTube, as David has already pointed out with Ancient Aliens crud and that.
Yeah.
In fact, it was from that video that both David and Atanche worked together on that Atanche was saying like more scholars need to come in because otherwise we cannot fight this BS.
Yeah. Well, and that would be a good place to start. I mean, certainly David's. I think David and I have a lot in common in that regard. Namely that our sort of debunking videos are kind of attracting the most viewers. I think there's, I think that there is a long, ancient folk tradition on YouTube of debunking. That's kind of a beloved, part of the platform. I mean, I often I saw. This was not on a history video, but I remember seeing a YouTube comment years ago where it was one YouTuber responding to another one, and it was like, "Oh, this is so cool! It's like back in the 17th century when some clergyman would write a pamphlet about, the covenant of works, and then another one would write a pamphlet about the covenant of grace, saying that guy's an idiot, and it's kind of like the sort of competing voices, like the printing press all over again, right? And I do think I think there's like sort of a lot of, obviously that creates. I think it's a net negative for the world. That sort of stuff it can be very negative, and I mean as I've said multiple times in videos and just sort of in private conversations. I mean once I finish with Checkmate Lincolnites, I'm actually going to probably move away from that stuff. But I do think that's like I think there's a reason why people are attracted to that kind of stuff. Because there is so much crap out there, and because it's so easy to get sucked into it, and it's certainly stuff that I think I pretty much, I mean, I know, Cypher, you've talked a lot about this, about just sort of the myths of history, the common misconceptions, a lot of that sort of partisan hackery that supports kind of one sort of erroneous interpretation of history over something that might be a little bit closer to the truth. Certainly both David and me to a lesser extent has kind of experienced that with Ancient Aliens and Atlantis and neo-Nazi beliefs about sort of, the ancient Aryan theory and all that.
Well, you especially also go after neo-Confederate stuff as well.
Yeah, but exactly. And that's sort of where sort of I come in is sort of the lost cause, which is, of course, to my mind, I think probably at least in American history, because that's kind of my sort of bread and butter. It's sort of the most destructive and just straight up murderous sort of historical misconception, series of historical mythologies and misconceptions and sort of political sort of narrative, perhaps in American history. Incredibly murderous, incredibly destructive. Like thousands of innocent people have died horrible deaths because of this particular set of beliefs. And I don't know why I'm laughing. It's not funny, but I've often said, if I can be just a tiny little nail in the coffin of the lost cause, and that's what goes on my obituary, then I'll die a happy man. But yeah, even so, there is sort of an appetite for that, right? There's an appetite for wait, this Atlantis stuff is not true. This lost cause stuff is just a bunch of crap. Your grandpappy ranting on at Lee Jackson Day with his 12-pack of Natty Light, that's not, he probably does not know more than somebody who has been studying this stuff for 30 years, or, this sort of like sort of Holocaust denial, Holodomor denial, give it a name. There's a million of these out there, and it is very hard to combat it, and sort of something that I've sort of thought often, especially kind of from an outside perspective, is kind of like, I keep waiting for academia to appear at the crest of the hill at dawn on the third day. You know what I mean? Like we're kind of under siege here.
Just a couple of us coming over the.
Yes, yes.
Well, I mean,
where's you're the reinforcement?
well, I mean, it's
Where's
not
the
like
rest of
they
the
ever,
reinforcement?
came to the rescue, because this is not a problem that's isolated to new media. Of course,
Right,
you just have to think about the History Channel, right, and what that is, and I don't think academia, particularly made a concerted effort to, enter this sort of popular debate and kind of try and shut stuff like that down there either. So I think it's an ongoing problem.
Yeah, and something that we'll definitely have to discuss, especially the reason why I have my dad on here, is that, like, I don't think this is a particularly new problem, because, I mean, like, Ancient Aliens, for instance, is something on it's like the #1 show on History Channel now, despite, Pawn Stars used to be, right? And, but, like, Ancient Aliens is absolutely that kind of crazy half-baked conspiracy theories, and it's running on old media, and, like, that kind of stuff goes way back. I remember there was one, like, with Leonard Nimoy that was, a whole series about that. Like, the one that I'm particularly familiar with is all the different, like, conspiracy theories about Wild West figures, that, like, Billy the Kid actually lived to be Stringy Bill from West Texas, or freaking Butch Cassidy actually died in Good Springs, Nevada.
We've got a lot of Jean Lafitte stuff down here in South Louisiana. That sort of Jean Lafitte lived to 100 and escapes to Missouri, and
like, old media has been absolutely complicit in spreading these myths and everything. And something that I want to point out when we talk about myths is, like, well, we're talking about, some of the myths we're talking about, like the Lost Cause, are absolutely destructive myths that need to be destroyed. But, like, they're also integral to U.S. history, and it's hard to just dislodge them, because what myth really isn't just that it's a falsehood or something, because myth can actually be perfectly true.
It's a story. I mean, it's a shared story. Yeah, it's a culture.
But it's a shared story.
Some of that came out of academia. I mean, the Lost Cause, that was
the Lost Cause. Yeah, absolutely.
Was an historian.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Frank L. Owsley. I was reading him recently.
But also, myths aren't myths just because they're stories. Myths are stories that inform identity. That's the reason why the Lost Cause has so much sticking power. Like any kind of myth, some myths are good. Like, I'd say that the John Brown myth, for instance, is a good one to keep. That's not something that we need to, completely destroy. I mean, there's problems with it, sure. But
there's
like
problems with it, yeah.
But, like, at the same time, it's.
I saw the comments on our last video, Cypher.
Yeah,
I saw those comments.
They can get a bit bloodthirsty, but
yeah. It's a little.
But you look at some of the myths that came out of medieval, the medieval times, and some of the blood atonements and some of that. You want to talk about mythology and some of what deaths and that what can come out of that. It's not something that's a modern issue. And our medievalists can certainly speak to that.
Well, yeah, and I mean, you can look at how, if you think about Charlottesville and the way that medieval iconography and ancient iconography as well has been, sort of adopted for all kinds of terrible purposes. But yeah, I mean, the Middle Ages and the ancient world, I think, stands on that kind of boundary of, sort of myth and history. And that can be, I mean, it's very important to study, but it can certainly be, misused or misinterpreted.
Even at the time, at
the time.
Yeah. I mean, you still had a bunch of people who, like the whole romanticism around chivalry and that is in and of itself a myth. I mean, like Don Quixote is a book completely about just saying like this is a myth, stop it.
Yeah.
But medieval kings lists, like will often, trace all the way back to, Odin or something, right? But it will then go into historical kings,
and that like that's not just like hey, look, I'm related to a god, ha ha ha, but it's also to legitimize the king, to legitimize their violence.
There's a political purpose for it.
Yeah, and that's where myth gets particularly bad. I mean, I don't think anybody like saying that Billy the Kid was alive in the 1920s. While they're wrong, I don't think they're doing any harm, really.
Yeah. Brushy Bill didn't get much out of that, but he got a few pictures in True West in that.
Yeah, I've been reading. I guess I'm not supposed to talk about it, but I'm going to say it anyways. I've been reading a lot about Billy the Kid for reasons, it's interesting. This book traces a lot of the mythology around it, and it's like even historians were absolutely engaging in it. So I'm also trying to point out that while debunking myths and that is debunking misconceptions and that is really important part of what we do in new media or even old media. It's not like the primary thing. That's not the primary reason to get involved, right?
No. Well, and also there's something just real quick, like the profession of history, at least in modern sense of like recording history of teaching history, is new relatively, and it's still maturing. Right, so that's something to keep in mind as well, is that like we're kind of doing better than we were back in like Wilson's day when he was kind of going off on his nonsense. But yeah, it's a process. Like academia, historical academia, it's still kind of learning. It's still sort of going through puberty in a lot of ways.
Oh,
right?
I'm actually wearing a shirt with him on there. It's Diogenes about to smack Wilson with a band hammer. But
there was a time when historians, it wasn't even that long ago, would kind of look down their glasses at you if you wrote a popular book. Like we're not even talking about YouTube. We're just talking about writing a popular book. Why are you writing for a popular audience? You're a scholar.
Yes.
You're supposed to be writing scholarship.
See, I gotta say
it's gotten better, but. Yeah,
it's
ahead.
Still bad. No, it's still bad. Like this is one of the other things that really motivated me to start a YouTube channel and go into teaching period, because there's just pretentiousness that just it is pervasive. As I know Cypher alluded to the ivory tower. It's still there, and it's like some of the best history books that I've ever read were not written by historians. They were written by journalists. And that's where I got my start. And like, they just want to tell a good story. And there are good stories that are true, not mythology, that need to be told. And I just feel like, and it's funny too, because a lot of you guys are all saying, oh, well, people, they kind of, they get like sucked into these ancient aliens and like Hitler's still alive in Argentina crap. But I think, honestly, all of us like have collectively failed. And like, I think we could all do a better job at just persuading people to learn history in general, because there are so many better stories than that crap that's far more captivating. I think we just need to we need to learn how to relate to people better, because I think it's one of those lowest common denominator things that the History Channel has been so guilty of. They realize, history is so broad, like, oh my gosh, what should we focus on? Oh, World War II. There we go. That's lowest common denominator. Like, and from there, like, I go out of my way to make stuff that is not World War II. Like, I think there's just so much out there that's just not covered. There's so much information trapped in books. We need to get it out there. And so back to what I was saying at the beginning, this pretentiousness, this needs to go. Like they need to come down from the ivory tower and join us. They should have joined us 20 years ago, frankly.
Yeah.
Well, this was one of the things because I've spent my life working in museums, running museums, taking history and making it available to everyone, saying, come on in and trying to tell stories, because that's all it is. It's a story, and telling it through artifacts, which are engaging, which are fun, which are interesting, and realizing that the story is interesting. And if you're not telling an interesting story, you're failing. It's up to us, whoever we are the ones that have decided to tell history. We've got to tell it accurately, but we've also got to tell it, as you were just saying, in an engaging way. You've got to tell it interestingly, because if you're boring people, and we all know teachers that were boring, and we all know stories that have been told in a boring way, we are the ones that are failing, because the people that are out there that are telling really interesting stories that are just freaking lies, they're the ones that are taking over from where we need to be doing it. I went into museum work because I loved museums when I was 10 years old, and I used to build museums in my patio. Yeah. That's what I wanted to do. And I didn't want to be in a classroom. I don't say anything wrong about the professors that are among us. That's great. I love people that can be a professor. I'm married to one. I love her very much. But, I couldn't do that. But by God, I can get up in front of a room of 1,500 people, stand on stage, take questions from the audience, whatever they want to ask me, and answer those, or say I don't know. Or I can put together an exhibit and have that open to the public. And if somebody's got a question, I'll come out of my office and answer it, or say I don't know, and I'll try to find the answer for you, because it's up to everybody. You guys need to be doing the same thing, and you are.
I remember when I got my degree, you look at all the course requirements, everything you have to learn, and before you can get your PhD and everything. Not a single course or class on teaching, but nothing. You don't learn how to teach at all. That's not even part of the job. You don't have to learn how to teach. You only have to learn how to research. Yeah,
I was literally thrown to the wolves when because I went from being a GA to like teaching, like being instructor of record, and they just were like, like I literally have the books here. They were like, all right, here's Give Me Liberty. I'm at it. Design a class now. And I was like, and that's like, I had plenty of help in terms of like I could go to people and ask things, but I was literally just thrown to the wolves, right? And
was that Foner, Give Me Liberty?
Yeah.
And see, Eric Foner is a great example of a historian who tells great stories, and that's why he's been so successful.
Yeah, I have my issues with him.
Well, I'm just talking strictly as a communicator.
Yeah, I mean specifically those books. I was actually given plenty of other books. I literally have a stack of textbooks over here. But
sorry,
they were the ones that I could reach without yanking the cord. But
no. But Mark, I mean, your point, Mark H. Your point about entertaining.
It works.
Yes, about entertaining history is like very, very well taken, and I do think that there is. I mean, that's kind of what I found with my channel is that specifically with the Civil War stuff that I do, which is for the stuff that I'm best known for. Is that I think people generally, I think a lot of sort of the popularity of those Civil War videos, people kind of ascribe to, I guess, their sort of memeability and sort of the humor and sort of I think there's generally kind of a very strong internet sort of subculture, very niche, but still kind of quite popular for it, kind of weird history thing of like the sort of pro-union, sort of do it again, Uncle Billy, Sherman type of stuff, just kind of the unionist type of thing, right? Sort of as a way, especially, which sort of became very popular once the Confederate monuments controversy kind of happened. So sort of the opponents to a lot of the Confederate monument stuff, I think kind of found a natural online home with a lot of this very kind of nerdy Civil War kind of sort of pro-United States Sherman posting type of thing, right? But I think I honestly think that a better explanation is that the Civil War is something that we're very used to hearing from, Shelby Foote, right? About just one hand behind your back. And then, cut to, Ken Burns very slowly pushing in on a guy with a kid next to a cannon going with no music and just some narrator being like, and then when the battles at Chattanooga happened, Longstreet's corps advanced up on the ridge. And, and that's sort of what we're used to. That's how we're used to learning about the Civil War. And it sucks. It sucks. It's awful. And then sort of, I think kind of what I do is I put on a silly hat and I do a funny voice and I make dick jokes. And all of a sudden it's this like incredibly refreshing thing. And I think that, so I think that there is like some serious kind of value to that. And I see a lot of other channels doing it too. I see, you mentioned World War II, Mr. Beat, but Potential History, I think is somebody who does, his World War II videos are hysterical. And it's a similar type of thing, right? It's something that you're used to hearing about very seriously and very reverentially, basically being sent up. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess my question would be, does public-facing historical scholarship have to be narrative history to capture an audience? Because obviously the narrative history has a broad appeal and is, it gives you the potential for stories that engage. But a lot of historians in academia aren't as interested in doing narrative history. They want to do more analytical.
So this is actually kind of a perfect time to segue. We haven't really defined our terms here, and I know there's going to be some folks who are going to, because when we use the term academic, we mean it very differently from like what, because most people use academic as like erudite or something like that, but it actually has a technical term, a technical meaning, and like even the term historian has a very different meaning to the public than how we're going to be using it. And so. First of all, I just want to I know this one's a perfect one for my dad because I've heard him rant about this my entire life. So Dad can define the difference between a historian and then like how there's like public historians, academic historians, and just like scholars in general.
Okay. Well, I'm going to define it the way I use it.
I know. I've heard you rant about it my entire life, so I know you can.
Yes. Well, when I talk about an academic historian, and I am talking about somebody who is in the ivory tower, writes books, doesn't engage in the public.
Ivory tower being universities.
The university, or in an archival kind of setting, something where they're not engaging in the public, with the public. They're writing erudite works that basically are going to be read by 150 people unless it's assigned to a class somewhere.
Other historians reading it.
Yeah. And they're historians writing for other historians. They're not trying to write for any greater area. They're looking to get ahead within the AHA or groups like that. They
American Historical Association.
Thank you. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm talking to the other ones on the panel and not to the people watching. I realize. When I talk about popular historians, I'm making a differentiation. Often you can be somebody who is in academia, but you can also be a popular historian. You can write with an eye towards books and articles, and you can move outside of that, as we have two people on the panel who are professors and also working in YouTube, and Joseph, who is getting his PhD and also working in YouTube. And sorry, am I doing something wrong with feedback or something?
Somebody else was feeding back there for a second.
Oh, you're good.
Okay, sorry about that. Where you are also being what I consider a popular historian, you can be an historian without having your feet in the ivory tower, without being on an academic on a university or college faculty, without having necessarily even having the academic credentials. Those are not necessary to be an historian. I don't believe. I think you can still be a fine historian. The whole point about being an historian is how are you doing history? And there have been so many historians who are really great historians who are dismissed by the history field because they don't have degrees as defined by the history field. And their work has been dismissed, and yet, they have done more for doing history that we should still be using and referring to and making sure it's still available. But because they were not within the accepted, they were not accepted by the field. As the field professionalized, it also closed in and set up the walls. And if you were not allowed in through the gates by being, getting the right degrees, you were not allowed in. And so that's.
It's not just having the right degrees, because nowadays there's a lot of people who are working in museums and that have PhDs in that, and then they're still excluded from by the ivory tower.
That's absolutely true. It is amazing how you can not be allowed in, and it is amazing. And I would guess Mark and David, since both of you have your degrees, you're within the ivory tower, but I would guess that your YouTube efforts are not seen within the tower as being of any value to, that if you were to put that on a grant application to the AHA or to whatever, academic forum you were asking for a grant or something like that, they would look at that and probably be more likely to turn it down than to see that of any value. I see that as a huge problem. Part of that, you have to understand, goes back to when I mentioned Ed Alexander, who's Dr. Edward Alexander. He had his PhD. He had been the director of the Wisconsin Historical Society, which was the largest historical society in the United States in the 1930s. He was part of the AHA. He was part of the split in the AHA, the American Historical Society, between the local historical societies, which at that point were the state historical societies, when they split out of the American Historical Society and created what later became the American Association for State and Local History, which was a look at having local historical societies having a group for them, because the American Historical Society did not want local historical societies or historical societies of any sort having a place at the table within the American Historical Society. And this happened in 1940. Wow. So this kind of a split, this kind of
though the split took until 1947 to actually be officiated, because there was something that happened around then, and I don't really like to talk about it.
There was some bombing, and people got angry at each other, a couple of atomic bombs, and a whole bunch of stuff.
Roswell happened in 1947. That was it.
That's it.
You ivory tower types can't fool me.
Hey, my experience, so don't say anything bad about it.
But
so, anyways,
my experience in academia. Oh, go ahead.
What we're pointing out here is that, like, scholar as a term is as versus like academic. Academics are people who are in the academy, as in like universities, and that's what we mean by academic when we use that term. Scholar is the more universal term. So when you go to like a conference, a scholarly conference, and you like the Western Historical Association, when you go there, typically on your badge, you will have a thing saying, like what university you're affiliated with, or in my dad's case, what museum he was affiliated with. But we had somebody on our panel who had to go by the term independent scholar. Actually, no, I think he managed to.
He did that on purpose. He specifically wanted that. He was a good friend of
I think he managed to get it turned to like local historian or something like that, just to kind of like give a middle finger to the entire establishment. So like this is something happening at like an academic conference, and he's literally making this one term just as a middle finger to the establishment. And that's the difference, is that like scholars, like all academics are scholars, but not all scholars are academics. My dad here being a scholar, many of us on this panel are scholars, but I think the difference being that any historian is going to be a scholar, but not all historians are going to be academics.
No offense, but I would hope that all of us are scholars.
Yeah, all of us are. And by the way, I have to tell you, I love all of your channels. I've watched all of them.
David was going to say something.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, I mean, I'm sure it's different at different schools, and it's different, and maybe even with different fields. But my experience was a little bit different, at least in ancient history, from what I saw. That if you wrote a paper to go into a peer-reviewed journal, you didn't have to have a degree. You could just be a scholar. You didn't have to be an academic. You could, if you wrote a good paper, it'd go through blind peer review, right? And they wouldn't know who it was, or what their degree was, or what school they were from, or anything. And if it was a good paper, they'd publish it. And same thing with a conference paper. In fact, a lot of grad students, deliver papers at conferences, and they don't have their degrees. So I didn't see a lot in my particular field of the idea of, you're not in the ivory tower, we're going to exclude you. I didn't find it very exclusionary in where I went and in my field. So I just want to say that.
Mark, is that the case for you?
I mean, I would say it's certainly it's not unheard of, and there are certainly productive, well-regarded scholars who do present at conferences or publish in academic journals or presses. But I think, for one thing, you have to wonder what the reason that someone would want to submit a paper, say, to a scholarly journal is, because you don't get paid for them. It's not something that you would do professionally. You kind of get compensated for it as an academic because it's considered part of your job to engage in active research. So you're getting, either people who are academics or people who are doing it just for the love of doing it, and they can obviously still do fantastic work. I think there are probably a lot of people who could publish in those sorts of ways and would, but it is a bit of a barrier for them because they have to think, well, how am I going to make my living? And something like YouTube, of course, to kind of bring it back around to that, is that does give you a potential way of doing the thing that you love and getting recompensed for it, that say publishing in traditional academic outputs maybe doesn't give you.
And that's a perfect segue, because the next thing, because we're now kind of on definitions here, and I think we've pretty well. I think everybody here in the comments and watching can kind of understand the difference between like a scholar and an academic, and how that difference can sometimes be. Although it's interesting that like medievalists and by the way, I have this random offshoot question, just real quick: are ancient historians considered medievalists?
No.
Okay, so what's the term for that?
Well, they just say ancient historian. Although I have heard someone say ancientist before, but I don't really use that.
That's a mouthful.
although like our term is modernist, so for the rest of us on the panel, besides Mark and David, we're all modernists. You know, and in fact, specifically Americanists as well, and that also sounds like a terrible
that sounds
term.
dirty. That sounds like we hate Americans.
I get if you do specifically Greece and Rome, you could call yourself a classicist.
Yeah.
But then as soon as you move outside, or maybe an Egyptologist will, you know, be with the classicists. But if you're doing anything outside of that, then there isn't a really good term for that.
Mark
Yeah,
and
okay,
David,
so,
where do you consider the line? Is it just like hard?
Well,
like,
there is a bit of an
476
overlap.
AD?
Like late antiquity and early medieval is kind of overlapping, so it's not. There's not a necessarily dividing line.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
But
the same
we're
thing
talking
with all
about between
periodized-
between like around 500 or so. You know,
I mean, that's the case with
600.
any kind of periodization, right? But
Yeah.
to get back on topic, so I just had to ask that as an aside because I've always been kind of confused by that. But you know, it seems like it's a modernist thing that that this whole divide between local history and you know, more academic history comes out, and it becomes really
in the
contentious.
States, at least, right? Cypher in the States. I mean, it's
Definitely in the States. I
Yeah,
don't know about European stuff.
Yeah, certainly in England there are you know, people who do medieval history who aren't in the academy. So
yeah, I mean,
And
we
they
have
don't get lumped into the antiquarian group at this point?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Because that used to be the problem in at least in Great Britain. They kind of got dumped into, well, they're the antiquarians, so they don't get accepted in. That would be the similarity with what happens in the States. In the States, it was, well, you're a local historian, you're a regional historian, you don't really count.
What's the term for being like too region? There's a very pejorative term for too regional that we hear a lot. That especially I know you've heard a lot in your career, Dad. But I've certainly seen it on my channel. Even when I've actually applied for grants, I can't remember the term. I keep on coming up with the word parochial. I know that's incorrect,
Well,
but
provincial.
provincial.
Is it provincial?
Yes. Yeah.
Provincial, yes.
So
God, that's like fucking General Cornwallis in The Patriots. You know what I mean? So provincial. 40, please, waiter.
it is something.
So
It is something-
provincial.
Church and burn them down. That's fine.
It is something, and mind you, I've actually gotten grants from the AHA. I've gotten 2 grants from the AHA, actually. But this is through a program called the, one of them's not a grant, one of them's a fellowship, and it hasn't actually happened yet because of COVID and all that. So that one up in Colorado, Dad.
Right.
But like, it's not AHA, it's called AHA Mellon, and so they actually like separate it from like AHA grants, American Historical Association. Mellon is just, I think, the grantee who gave like the
Mellon
fund.
Foundation.
Yeah. And so that's supposed to be like, there is some push to have like this kind of broader history, and that's what AHA Mellon is actually supposed to do. It's supposed to foster what they call career diversity, but you can already tell in the terminology that they use that it's still that looking down as provincial.
That's unfortunate.
Well, it's kind of ironic
Shallow and
because
pedantic.
there's so much specialization today where they're like, well, I study this small geographic area between this year and this year. That's my specialty.
Yeah.
So it's so narrow.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's all
How
you
can
can
you,
do.
you know, when you look at someone else and say, oh, you know, that's too local. I mean,
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
but I only study one-armed women under 40 in central Anatolia between, you know, yeah.
And then they're the ones calling us provincial, and that's kind of the thing that I'm hoping that we're going to overcome with all this, with this discussion, is that like we can kind of see that not only is there a need for this, but there's also a way to think about this kind of public history that we do.
Well, let me. Can I ask ask the panel a question here? So what do we all think about sort of more academics coming to YouTube? Is that something that we would sort of generally like to see, or not?
I think generally yes, but I do fear that like we alluded to earlier, the communication skills aren't quite there. Like you do need to know how to communicate this stuff like in a way that is understandable by more than 150 people. So, so yeah, like I would love to see more just collaboration. Like, in fact, that's what one of my goals for the rest of this year, 2021, is to speak with more historians on camera. Like some of my best videos I've made is where I go to the experts, the ones who have dedicated a big chunk of their life. Like David said, like they know this very narrow, but go to them and like you dig it out of them. I want to see more collaboration between us who are already here and those in academia.
Yeah, certainly what you don't want to see is people just basically putting up their lecture.
Oh God,
yes.
Yes.
We all know.
And there are a few channels like that. Some of them are good.
Yeah.
Some of them are good, but they're few and far between.
Yeah, and normally what it is somebody put a camcorder in the back of the class and gave a lecture and then upload it. I mean, I'm kind of guilty of this myself, because I've done a couple of things where I've literally just uploaded lectures.
But they're good. They're good.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, they are good.
Yeah. But one thing that is different from the way I do those versus, those aren't the ones that I've uploaded to my channel are not ones that I like just straight up, recorded in front of a class and then uploaded it. What I did was that I sat there with this microphone and this is my fancy microphone with all the nice audio stuff and tried to lecture in a way that would be more universal. But when you're in front of a class, you're talking to that class and you're also have all the ers and ums and all that kind of stuff. And when I did it by taking out all of that stuff and also trying to make it so that like it's more universal. It's something that I don't like. I could literally just play it class to class to class, and it doesn't matter what class it's in. It's useful for that specific topic, and I think that's something that like standard pedagogy doesn't allow for. That if you're trying to teach in a class, you're going to end up teaching to that class. Like because of COVID and everything, I have a bunch of lectures that I did do that exact kind of recording. It was like a Zoom lecture, so I just recorded the Zoom. I'm never going to upload that to my channel because that is for that class, and it doesn't work for anything other than that class.
There's a medium. You can't put a radio show on TV or
Wouldn't YouTube, I mean, just by its format, wouldn't the public also define which ones work? And then, I'm thinking, Mark, since you're the sort of the president or whatever of we
created you.
You would then know which ones to go to and say, let us help you with becoming a better history tuber, and start kind of picking out those academics that do step their way into this format and say, this is find those few. Because I'll tell you, from my standpoint as somebody working with old media, I tried, because I got involved with, and I'll use Pawn Stars as an example because that's the one I know the best. I got involved with them doing one of the pilots. I've done over 200 episodes with them. Over the years from 2009 to today, I tried to get friends of mine in the museum field to get involved with them. And I could not find anybody that would step in and do what I did. They were scared of it. They were scared of taking the time. It took too much time to do the research because I do all my own research. They don't know what I'm going to say when I show up, all of that sort of thing. There's no scripting involved. I come in, I do my talk, it's all my work. And when I would talk to friends of mine in the field that I thought could do it, I couldn't find anybody that I thought could pick up some of the slack. So I wasn't doing, taking all this time out of my day that would, take over and give me some breaks from it. And I think that you would probably find that as well, because I think part of what's happening in terms of getting more academics involved with YouTube is, as I said earlier, I think there's also a lot of fear there. Yeah. Because there's a lot of putting yourself out in front of the public when you go onto a medium like this. It's your face, it's your voice, it's you speaking out there. Yes, you're putting your sources out there if you're doing it right. You're saying your own opinions at times. You know, when you're doing something like what Andy does, you know, when he's saying, you know, these statues should come down because they are racist and things like that. You know, you're going to get some people that are not really happy with you. And, you know, when you're doing something like that, there's a lot of, you know, it's different when you're in a classroom and you've got, you know, 25 or 50 or even 150 people. You're protected in that setting. You're not when you're on YouTube. And there's a lot of academics that don't like that. They are scared of being out here in front of the world, and that's where you're at on YouTube.
And frankly, they should be scared. They frankly should be.
Yeah.
Like you have to have a thick skin, that's for sure.
That's a good segue to talking about let's talk about like some of the disadvantages before we get too much into like, because I mean, I think most of us have been basically being like rah, join YouTube, do the thing, and there's plenty of reasons for academics to not join YouTube, be it technological, be it YouTube itself. I mean, I want Dad, I want you to make a podcast at some point, but I also know that your audio editing skills are a bit lacking, and
you can help me with that, son.
Yeah, but like but beyond, well, we can talk about technological difficulties. We can talk about, you know, just the whirlpool of hate that you get into because of this stuff. I mean, we talked a lot about debunking myths, and when you debunk myths, that's challenging people's very identity. And when you do that,
you're poking the hornet's nest for sure.
Yeah, and some of them,
in public. It's not just YouTube. It's anytime you step out in public. I've had people tell me they hate me in an Arco station in Orange, California. It's everywhere. Just trust me. If you're in public, it happens.
But
and I'm sure you've had to deal with it more than we have. Yeah,
we could talk about your random encounters with people. I think most of us don't really get the kind of attention you do. Although I'm starting to learn that I need to. So, in case everybody doesn't know, he has this whole routine when somebody spots him in public. You know, oh hey, glad you liked the show. You know, here's a card with my picture on it that says go to the State Museum. The Clark County Museum.
Oh,
if you haven't been to the Clark County Museum, please go check it out.
See? Oh, nice.
And
yeah, my girlfriend tells me I need to be cooler and I need to ask people their names and stuff and
I'm starting to learn that
instead of get lost.
Yeah.
I just go, fuck you. That's what I do. But I'm just like awkward. And I'm just like, oh, thank you.
I just ran into somebody.
Ask them their names.
I just ran into somebody at the liquor store who's, you know, perfectly just like, oh, hey, I watched your channel. It's, you know, that kind of thing. And I'm just like, I'm glad you like the channel.
You can autograph the back and give it to them.
Well, but that is really interesting.
Here's your autographed frickin' beer.
Another thing is people think, go ahead. I was just going to say, just briefly, that people, when you're on YouTube, people think, oh, they're a public personality. They're fair game now.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I can say whatever I want to them because they're a public personality, and anything goes. You know.
Yeah. Which is true. I mean, to an extent. Yeah. I mean, that, you know, it's. But no, I mean, I think that it is really interesting what you were saying, Mark, about like that a lot of academics just want nothing to do with this because it looks awful, and like to an extent they're kind of right. Like there's a lot of it can be very draining on your mental health to have to deal with all of these to just be to be every time you open up the computer, just like all of the fucked up stupidity of the human race, just like it's just like shoved at you. That can, it takes a toll. It takes a serious toll. And if you're kind of comfortable in your ivory tower and you're like, look, I got tenure, or even if you don't, if you're just like, look, I've got my little niche, I've got my thing, I do what I love and I'm happy where I am, that's totally valid. And I wouldn't sort of try to bully anybody out of that. And it's like, you know what? You should have to read racist comments every day. Don't be selfish. You know what I mean? Like that's insane. But at the
one
same
thing
time,
I would say to reassure, an academic who is thinking of, going onto YouTube is that, remember that the first video you put out will be seen by 4 people.
Yes.
And so you have time.
And all of them will be your mother.
You don't have to be great the first time around.
Yeah.
Find yourself a community of other YouTubers, improve your skills, and by the time there are more people watching, you will be better, and that's fine.
Yeah.
And you can make mistakes, it's not, you don't have to be perfect. Like, I've made several videos, I've made entire videos about my mistakes. And I think it's a good exercise, not just in terms of normally I'll just pin a comment like my neoliberalism video, for instance. I just did I had this horrible screw up on dates where I made oh crud, I can't remember.
Was it Hayek?
Hayek? Yeah, I made Hayek
yeah.
into this immortal being that lasted for 1,500 years.
And they came very upset.
On my Discord server, there's actually a meme, emoji based purely out of that one mistake. It's just the immortal Hayek, you can make those mistakes and just pin a comment. You can people are normally going to be forgiving. Of course, there's going to be the idiots who think oh, you got those dates wrong, you're not a historian. It's piss off.
And there's obviously a difference between sort of the entire premise of your video being just completely false and messing up a date or messing up the name of a city or a pronunciation or getting a minor little fact wrong. There's sort of a difference. And, even within academic scholarship, that shit happens constantly.
Yes.
So yeah, and everybody's going to make mistakes, and that's just part of it.
The book I was reviewing at one point had movies that it was talking about movies that somehow hadn't come out yet by their dates. Because it was saying that because they put 20 instead of 19. So it's seems like Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid are coming out in about 50 years.
Yeah, exactly. All tomorrow's myriad species of man.
That kind of stuff happens all the time, and it should. If it doesn't worry people in academia, then it really shouldn't worry them in new media. And you're right to point that out, Mark, that you can grow. There's reasons to kind of deal with this, but let's get back on the topic of the problems of dealing, waking up to, a barrage of bigotry every day, and in old media, you didn't really deal with this. Sure, you'd have the random guy at the gas station, which.
And part of that, and I think Mr. Beat had something to say. He was trying to.
Oh yeah. No, it's okay. I was just going to say what kind of helps push back against maybe some of that hate is if the audience knows you're coming at it in good faith. And a lot of times what helps that is, you develop a relationship with your viewers over time. And that does take a lot of time for people to kind of start to trust you. Oh, this guy really just wants to learn and spread knowledge. He doesn't have this nefarious agenda where he's trying to take over the world or something or push a racist viewpoint. Yeah.
But people will interpret. How many times have you been called a cultural Marxist?
I've been called literally everything. And part of it's because I do choose controversial topics sometimes on purpose because that's something we could also talk about is we choose these sometimes because we want to get views. We want to suck people in that normally wouldn't watch our stuff. And so it's that balance But I think as long as people like what I did let me give you an example. Like I think all of you, or at least most of you, are aware of my anti-Semitism video, which is my most successful, most viewed video,
Most popular.
and I do get a lot of hate on that. But the way I do the video is the way I do most of my videos, which is I'm just learning myself. And let me walk you through the process that I'm going through as I research this video. Like I start with a question like, why do so many people hate Jewish people out there? Where does this all come from? Come with me. Let's go on this journey together. I can understand why some of you might be scared to go down this journey with me, but yeah, like I think all of us kind of do that to some degree, where we're just like, we're along for the ride just as much as you at home are,
Yeah, I've had situations where someone will call me an idiot, a moron, and all this, and then I just engage them in conversation, and it turns into a nice conversation, and then they're like, "Thanks for replying," and you'd never expect that from the way they started out. It doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes I continue to think I'm an idiot.
Yeah,
but there are people who you get through to. Yeah.
Once you get to a certain point, it's not really worth trying to engage with them. If they start off like that, just ban. Because if you're dealing with, I think my channel averages something like 6,000 comments a day. There's no way you can deal with all of that.
I'm still small. Yeah.
And you can't really engage with everyone, and especially as soon as I see that kind of rhetoric, it's just instantly bye.
Yeah.
And
I'm not that way too. I mean, I don't read most of my comments, but yeah, as soon as I see anything even vaguely bigoted, then they're banned.
Yeah, and but that's actually kind of a way of dealing with this like barrage of hate that you're inevitably going to get. Now, when I say like 5,000 comments a day, most of that is actually in replies. Like I swear there's a comment thread that's been going on my channel for 6 years and it's still going. They're still talking. The same two people are still talking to each other 6 years later. It's crazy.
They're gonna get married. They're totally gonna get married.
They're gonna get married. I mean, at least consummate the relationship already. But like, I can't really monitor the replies in that, but like the starts of threads, especially. But like that's actually a way of dealing with all the nasty comments. Is that like you have the power to ban people. You have the power to not talk to them, and that like that guy in the only way to ban the guy at that gas station would be to like knock him out or something.
No, I just had to talk to him and calm him down and find out what he was angry at me about.
He was angry that you don't give prices, right?
Yeah, that's what it was. And it was like, what? And that was the first comment I'd ever had about being on the show. He just told me he hated me. And it was like, why? Why don't you give them a price? It's because I run museums. I don't sell this stuff. Oh, okay. Wandered off.
That's simple. Huh?
But I when I was running the museum, the one thing that I will say, unlike all of you, when you're on YouTube, you're getting comments back on all your videos. And again, that's the difference about being on YouTube that you have to understand is inherent to what you're doing. It's different with what I was doing and what I have done for years. I wrote and produced videos as part of my museum. I've done the Pawn Stars thing. I've been on a lot of other shows. I've been on French television shows. I've done a Flemish language cooking show. I've done all kinds of other television. I've done all kinds of stuff. Anybody that calls me, shoot, I'll show up. I've done documentaries. I've done all kinds of things. And they could get to me, but they could only get to me at the museum.
Yeah.
They didn't know my home address. Now they can always find it if they've got half a brain.
Yeah, I actually had some people threaten your guys' address once, trying to threaten me.
Yeah. But
it
they
was
tried to threaten me as well. But what the hey? I don't worry about it. I've never had any worry about anybody actually coming after me.
Yeah.
But whenever I've gotten any, really nasty comments, it's gone through, it has in the past always gone through the Clark County email. And, and it was just delete. I don't care. I'm not going to engage. And most of it was because people didn't like the fact that if they always wanted me, because I was the beard of knowledge, they wanted me to say whatever stupid theory they had was correct.
Well,
I
think a lot of the bad comments are actually really just people are angry that you didn't say the thing that they wanted you to say.
Yeah.
But like I think you are touching on one of the interesting points about this conversation. King, stop that. He was kind of clawing at my shirt.
He wants to be on camera.
Well, I think there's also something to be said about positive comments.
Well, but I wanted to hit at something that was hitting on there is that he was talking about like the fact that at the museum you have to either go to the museum or you have to go through the actual like museum's specific like email to even get at you. Whereas us, I mean, like there's a live chat going on right now, right? Like, and people could basically say what I do have mods who are there to moderate the conversation in that, and they have specific instructions on how to deal with that. But ultimately the feedback machine is right there to the side of us, or wherever it is in
and
your
that
browser.
is a part of the medium, and whenever and then the next
of,
medium in 30 or 40 years,
that's kind of what makes so
when we're doing holograms.
So that's kind of what makes this new media, right? Like like YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, all the different kinds of social media, but also like blogging and that's not social media, that's new media. But like all of them have a comment section. All of them have some sort of feedback mechanism. They have, likes and dislikes, or they have shares. They can share the thing.
Exactly.
And in old media, the way that you share something is that it makes it on the local news, or it gets special advertising or something like that. It is a one-way street. And, yes, you have like letters to the editor, you have emails to whoever, or you have
graffiti on the walls, when you're walking through the forum with Cassius, and he says, "Look, Brutus, they have depicted you stabbing Caesar," and you say, I would never betray my friend," and Cassius says,
and then they start,
"But the Republic, Brutus, the Republic."
And then they start admiring who has the best drawing of a penis on the wall. But
yes.
If you look at Roman graffiti, there's a lot of penises.
Oh yes. But in terms of like also community building, right? Because like there is sort of that, and not to get kind of weird and parasocial about it, but like you were saying, Mr. Beat, about sort of the sense of community and the sense of like people saying, "Oh my God, you taught me something. This is new to me," or sort of something people kind of sort of fostering. You can kind of foster a very specific interest. Like we were talking about, we don't do
Building
World War
niche.
II. I mean, some of us do, but it's like we sort of avoid the stuff that everybody does to sort of foster more specific interests. And we want to find those great, compelling stories from history. And sort of the advantage of YouTube and the advantage of the feedback that you get is that you can get somebody really interested. I saw people talking in the chat earlier about King Philip's War. So utterly obscure New England sort of Native American war, between
they were talking about your episode on it.
Yeah, exactly. But these people, like, they're into King Philip's War because me and my mom went out in the woods, one day 3 years ago, and I was like, I want to make a King Philip's War video, and now it's kind of this thing, right? And not to be like, oh well, not to take credit for whatever, but even so, it's kind of this community has sort of this new interest, and there is that sort of positive feedback loop as well, and you can kind of create there's something kind of special, and so there's sort of good aspects to new media as well. I guess I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons
Yeah.
of it. I got to step away and grab my next beer because I ran out. But this is a good question to keep going while I go grab that.
Yeah.
But like, before I go grab that, the one thing I'd say on that is, well, yeah, there's you can actually get like good feedback from the negative comments too, not just not just in terms of like the people who are correcting you, and that's always a great help, but also like the really vociferous ones, the ones who are just like, you cuck, blah blah blah, so, all the reactionary buzzwords, and that you can figure out what buttons you want to push, because in reality, when I see somebody complaining, like, oh, you're stupid soy, blah, 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 it's like, now I know that I need to work. I need to do more stuff on this specific topic, because those are the people I need to go after. And so, like, there's also, like, not just in terms of like positive comments or positive criticism, whatever that's called, good faith criticism, constructive criticism, that kind of thing, but also the really nasty ones. You can still learn something from that, and so this like new media experience gives you a lot to build off of, not just in terms of good, but also the bad is something to build off as well. I'm going to step out for a second.
Yeah, no, grab your beer. No, but I think you're right about especially about the soy, because it always reminds me to have to consume more soy. Because what people don't, there's so much estrogen in cow's milk. So,
Yeah, that's a good point. That's right. Yeah.
I don't want to grow boobs, so I'm going to stick with my soy milk. Thank you very much.
I remember when I would write papers and as a grad student, and I was always looking for feedback. I was like, can you read this? Can you read this? I don't want to read it, With YouTube, you don't have to worry about that, boy. Everybody can tell you exactly what they think about everything,
Yeah.
I like it, though, I actually appreciate constructive criticism. Yeah.
I do read the comments, and I will say that I often learn a lot from my comments. I have a lot of regular viewers who will recommend books, and they will say, hey, you mentioned this person for like 5 seconds. Did you know this as well? And that gets me down a new rabbit hole, and like it opens up my my horizons open up even more. And I feel like a lot of the momentum that's carrying my channel now is my viewers, like, and they're kind of pushing me just as much as I'm pushing myself to discover new things, to like future video ideas. Like, I've literally stolen probably 75% of my video ideas over the past year have come from my viewers.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. That's great. Yeah, no, especially, and I love the sort of, and it's always nice when, it's the really kind of obscure shit, right? Like somebody, I still have to look into this. I had no idea what they were talking about, but sort of the Civil War is what I'm known for, but my real love is 17th century sort of northern Atlantic seaboard stuff. And somebody was saying like, well, when is Adam Shea going to make a video about the Wabanaki guys who like commandeered a French warship and were like, being pirates in like the Gulf of St. Lawrence and in the waters off New England in like King William's War or something? And I was like, that happened? Like, and I haven't looked into it. I don't even know if it's true, but it's just like, oh my God, that's like so up my alley. It's like, frankly, unsettling, So, but yeah, that stuff is awesome. You're so right, Mr. B.
And you really actually, awesome. Toonshot, you're like one of the few channels who could pull that video off.
Yeah,
like
there's also
there's a lot of history. I don't have the images. Like, I don't even know how I would. Well, I don't even know where I researched that.
It's also a lot of channels. There's a lot of channels that do the like obscure facts about history, I hate those channels because they
they're not that obscure most of the time.
There's that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, did you know Cleopatra was Greek? And it's like that.
Yeah, or
that sounds classic pretentious. I'm sorry, that was a horribly pretentious thing to say because a lot of people don't know that. It's
the number of times I've heard people go like, "Did you know that Vikings didn't actually have horns on their helmets?"
Yes. It's that. Yeah.
It's
So they wore them on their vests. Didn't everybody know that? Come on.
right here. They were right here.
Yeah, that's right. Only on one time.
but like, I mean,
Oh, just
You
real
could-
quick.
you
Real
could
quick.
say-
This has nothing to do with anything. But in the 1997 film, The Messenger: The Story of Joan of Arc, there's this one guy. I don't know, Mark A. Alliterative history. You might know about this. But he had like a spike on his plate armor, and it was a French knight, and he grabbed an English guy's head and went like and like impaled his head on his spike, and it was like the most fucking awesome shit I'd ever seen. And I was like 12 and way too young to be watching this horribly violent, disgusting movie. So yeah, why don't we talk about that for a little bit?
but like,
You need to do something on or have you done something on the black officers in the Civil War in New Orleans?
I have kind of
just
tangentially.
recently.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, like 6 months ago, I talked a lot about the first Louisiana Native Guard in my video about Black Confederates.
No. The Union officers.
Oh, the Union guys. Yes. Only tangentially. Although the first Louisiana Native Guard, also were, Union guys. But yeah, I have mentioned them. But
Union guys. And what happened to them? Because it's a good story.
Well, there was also when they did some destruction. Yeah. Anyway, we could get into this. We won't get
one of the most requested movie reviews on my channel is actually Glory, so that could be an interesting one. But
shit, man, if you want to do that together, I'd be down.
Well, I did a pistol that was owned by one on Pawn Stars.
Ooh. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
But in terms of feedback and how that helps, I also want to touch on how, especially for Mark and David, how that can help in terms of not just building a YouTube channel and that, not just for new media, but how a scholar could take that and use that for their own scholarly work. Because, I don't really necessarily call my channel scholarly. I'd say that it's public history rather than scholarly history. But like, I definitely take a lot of that feedback and use it for my own scholarly work. I know that Matt, Mr. Beat actually uses many of his own videos are like designed for his own classroom. But also, I'm sure you get feedback from your students. Just, I don't want to hear another song, Mr. Beat.
Yeah, that happens.
But like, what are your guys' use of this kind of feedback engine of new media to benefit not just your channels and that, but your own scholarly pursuits?
Well, it can certainly help with teaching. So, if something works with a YouTube audience, then there's something that you can take away with that may work in the classroom. But I have actually done not many, but 1 or 2 videos that have talked about my ongoing research. And so it is an opportunity to workshop something that you're maybe going to give as a conference paper, especially if it's geared towards an audience of non-specialists. So, if you're at a conference that is very tightly focused, then you're obviously going to, be writing a paper that's very, it really gets into the weeds. But if it's at a more general conference,
I've actually used YouTube comments in an academic in a conference paper.
Mm-hmm.
No joke. It was about like conspiracy theories and that.
Right.
So it's perfect.
Yeah. So I think it can be useful for research. For your own research program, depending on how you do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there is kind of a clash, right? Of when you're talking about the sort of the feedback loop and speak of the devil, I'm getting feedback on my mic. So you have the ivory tower.
Sorry, Matt, I had to mute you.
Oh no, that's fine. I don't blame him at all. I thought he was muting me. Anyway, so you have the ivory tower, right? Yeah, I got you. You have the ivory tower, and it's sort of it is this kind of this bastion of scholarship, of course, and then you have sort of the YouTube comments, the wave of brown YouTube comments sewage kind of lapping against it in a lot of ways, which maybe this analogy made more sense in my head, but it's an interesting juxtaposition, I think, because there is sort of a sort of bathroom stall sort of graffiti element to YouTube comments, and we've kind of, as we've talked about Cypher on a few occasions, just, you know, both in public and private, about sort of YouTube being in many ways kind of the current kind of front line for historic. It is kind of interesting seeing those two worlds kind of collide in a lot of ways. And yeah, and it's not all bad. Kind of like we were saying, you know, we get ideas from our audience members. We are very sort of invested in the topics and eager to learn. But yeah, it is sort of interesting, and I think that's kind of where not to kind of get back into something we've talked about before, but sort of all the debunking stuff, I feel like that is kind of at the intersection of that, where you have sort of academic history versus sort of what kind of the man on the street is thinking about, or what their perceptions of history are, and that's just sort of a very interesting collision.
Well, I mean,
maybe I'm just not making a broader point here. Yeah, I don't know. I just think that's very interesting.
So, I mean, in terms of, because one of the things I wanted to hit on is like this idea of the front lines of history, right? And, you know, while debunking is absolutely important, it's also like a good part of, like, you won't find many academic or scholarly, you won't find many like books that are like, here are the problems with these popular myths. Like that's not really what scholarly books do. They instead construct their
but it is kind of what you do, right? I mean, and it's what David does.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, so yeah.
And I mean, I've had people get really angry with me. Like my most popular video is 10 common slavery myths, and I've had people going like, "How dare you not cite a book exactly about this myth?" And it's like, because no academic is writing about the myth, they don't write about myths, and like, and while there is absolutely like, you know, one of the things with Billy the Kid, you know, it's at the top of my head because I've been reading a lot about him, and like the book that I'm reading, half of it is purely about myth, surrounding it, and this is like a 400-page book, so it's like 200 pages just purely about the legend of Billy the Kid, not the real thing, but like the legend and how it built up and all that. And while he talks a little bit about like the historiography in that, which historiography can absolutely be complicit in that. I mean, I would still call Walter Noble Burns a historian. I just wouldn't call him a very good one. But like for those who don't know, Walter Noble Burns created kind of like our standard Billy the Kid myth, the Billy the Kid as hero kind of myth. He wrote the saga of Billy the Kid, and like, for instance, it was so popular that when Bonnie and Clyde were killed, the only book they had in their trunk was Walter Noble Burns's saga of Billy the Kid. You know, that's how popular it was. You know, Hollywood has made something like 30 movies off of this one book. So, you know, this book is looking at this kind of myth making and how it's like building off of each other and all that. So there's a lot of work done on that, but it's not really about debunking there. It's about kind of like studying how myth builds and all that. So, like, I mean, I think my video about the Lost Cause, for instance, isn't really about debunking it, even though I do some debunking in there. It's more about like learning how it came to be, and you know, why it remains popular, like how it, you know, like that kind of thing is really important, and I think I've seen a lot of good come from that.
Yeah, absolutely. That video is totally about the historiography of the Lost Cause, from, you know, Edward Pollard to sort of kind of going on, and I think that's kind of how you, because I think a lot of people don't know that historiography is a thing. You know, I think a lot of there is sort of this idea that
history is static.
That history is static, and I've seen people sort of say it's just like, what do you mean this lost? What do you mean lost cause? Like, what, people just suddenly decided to believe something different, and it's like, do you watch the news? Like, you know what I mean? Like, this happens all around us every day. People kind of choose to believe a narrative and are very selective. And I mean, yeah, Lost Cause. It was like, I mean, Alexander Stevens, you know, in like 1866, somebody was just like that Cornerstone speech, man, that was a really bad look. And he was just like, well, that's not what I meant. I didn't say it quite that way, you know. And he like tried to like walk it back, and it was like, no, dude. But that sort of stuff will happen all the time. A lot of people just don't kind of have. They just don't really know that the way people think about history changes over time. Sometimes
we're already seeing it.
Very significantly.
We're already seeing it with the January 6th riots. We're already seeing them trying to like.
Oh yeah.
Different political sides saying this is how it went down. No, this is how it went down.
Oh yeah, I mean, like that's going to happen with any event, right? That's like you're going to have different perspectives of that. I mean, like we're seeing a lot of denialism with January 6th, which is kind of you know, people saying that it's like from Antifa, and that is like, whoa, no, what? That's insane. But I mean, there are differing perspectives on this. So, you know, for instance, like was it a you know, a white nationalist movement? Was it you know, was it specifically because of private militias? Was it because of QAnon? You know, those are things that historians are going to be arguing about for decades to come. Right. And there's no answer to that. That's the kind of interpretive thing, because the answer to that question is yes. It's all of that. But like, which one's more important? Which one, you know, how much of it is just like Trump's conspiracism and that? Like, these are the things that are already starting to be hashed out in the media today, and will continue to do so. You know, I've already done an episode on American insurrections myself. So like, even the history profession, there's already a book on it. There's actually a book that came out last week on the from the University of it starts with an N. It's not Nebraska.
Nevada.
Oh God, no. Nevada. The University of Nevada Press doesn't really do that much. But no, it's one of the news something or another. Not New Mexico. I could tell you that. Not New Mexico. It's like New York or something like that. I don't know. But it literally came out last week, a history book on the January 6th insurrection from a history department. It's like they're already like historians are already like, let's do this. Yeah. And that kind of quick interpretation is not something that a lot of people really think of the history profession, because they think of it as a static thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely, they do.
And that's kind of because we're not just you know, pulling stuff out of books and making them into YouTube videos, right?
We're interpreting it.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. Well, that's kind of a thing, and I think our the sort of Americanists among us can sort of relate to this, especially kind of when you're dealing with some more sort of obscure topics about which not many, or very sort of specific and kind of myopic topics about which not much literature has been written. You do kind of, I mean, I've found myself kind of more than once, and sort of, you know, I had a fair bit of imposter syndrome, not going to lie, where I'm researching some aspect of usually kind of colonial history that is very just kind of provincial and a bit obscure, and you realize, like, wait, there has been actually no scholarship about this, and you kind of have to like just kind of, you know, roll up your sleeves and be like, all right, well, I guess I'll do it myself, you know, and just go through the private courses and just sort of figure it out, you know, and just kind of do your best. But I also think, sort of speaking of the kind of Americanist sort of thing, I do think in a lot of our discussions about historiography, we do, Cypher, we do kind of portray our modernist bias. And I'm sure alliterative Mark and David could tell us all about this. But when you're sort of dealing with archaeology, then it's kind of a whole different sort of thing. And I know Stefan Milo, if you're still in the chat, I saw you earlier. Yeah, but if you know, you're a legend. You're a legend. But yeah, and I know he sort of deals with this a lot as well. But there is, I mean, that's the sort of way that our perception of history can change just on the most mundane new archaeological evidence is amazing, right, guys?
Absolutely. Well, I would certainly say that, and I would also be cautious when you say that there is no scholarship on a subject. Only because
Yeah.
I have heard this many times. It is often that there is no easily accessible scholarship through the internet
Or in your research library.
Yeah, in your research library. I've seen a couple of comments on the stacks of books around me. You have no idea. My library.
Oh no,
Good point.
we have these things as when I was growing up called
Very fair point, yeah.
booklanches.
Yeah, there are
I'm not even kidding. We absolutely do that.
There is much more in the 3 storage units, and much of it is not online.
Yeah,
These are not books that have been scanned. These the reality is that much that has been written, much that has been published, and I would say that Mark and David can probably speak to this as well. Much of what has been done in scholarship is not easily accessible. I don't care what has been said. It is not out there. And I speak as somebody who has published over 500 articles, 4 books, 85 monographs over the course of my career as well, much of which you cannot find online, and in very obscure areas. So
I was spoiled because, being at a university, you can just go to the library and, like, even if they don't have it, you're like, could you order this for me? Sure. And then within a week, it's there. You can get whatever you want.
There's still a lot of stuff that's not available
in the index, and it's something that's been indexed.
Yeah, there's still a lot of stuff that's not available from even like interlibrary loans. Like for instance, like every single article you've ever written that at least for the Slow Tribune is not publicly available. And like the like for instance, I'd say like this book right here, it just happens to be because I've been working on it, on stuff about this. But this book right here is probably the best resource on early Las Vegas, right? By far, you want to know what Las Vegas was like pre-World War II, this is the best thing you can have, right? I think you agree, Dad, right?
Yeah, Stan Pierce piece, right?
Yeah, and like a lot of people would go to Wikipedia and that, and just some problems with the Wikipedia there.
God, don't use it.
Especially for early Las Vegas. But like this is something that like I think has been out of print for what, like 2 decades now?
I couldn't tell you, but Stan's going to be happy that you showed it.
And mind you, this was written in 1978, 72, something like that. And it's only had 3 rounds of publication. And so it is actually exceedingly rare. And yet it is literally the best resource on early Las Vegas. And just think about like how many movies have been made about it. Imagine if like, if Bugsy happened to have, if somebody actually had bothered to read this thing, it'd be a completely different movie.
Yeah.
And like people wouldn't have this whole like the mob built Las Vegas. So like this is something that like you're going to have a hard time even getting through interlibrary loan because it's so rare. I mean, yes, you can get it, but you're going to be waiting for weeks.
And even if you can get your hands on something, it might be like a 19th century edition or something with not modern scholarly standards and
exactly.
the pain in the ass to deal with.
And it may be the only one in print. It may be the only time it was ever printed, and maybe the only piece that was ever done on the subject. And it may have been some antiquarian who decided, I think I'm going to do this for the Antiquarian's Journal of 1886, and that's the only thing they ever did on, Celtic high crosses in Durham or something. I don't know.
And that's something you'll come across. I feel like I've come across a lot with specifically late 19th and early 20th century, like history books where you're kind of reading it's like, this stuff is really interesting. This person really seems like they know what they're talking about. And then they'll say something like, yes, I was over at the Berghof talking with my good friend Hitler, and he said his opinion was that, like, they'll just say something incredibly weird, like, really quite horrible. And you'll be like, okay, maybe not this guy, or maybe else, but it's.
But in terms of how this kind of like obscure knowledge, this kind of stuff that like is literally like hard to even get a hold of, I think that's something that that people don't really think about when we talk about like new media and bringing these kinds of things to light, because we're also talking about like how new media is a form of like our work on new media, like HistoryTubers, is a form of interpretation, not just regurgitation. And bringing these kinds of things to light. I mean, I can point to several scholarly works that if they had access to this book, they would rewrite the whole dang thing.
Yeah.
You remember
one thing that sorry.
I was going to say, do you remember like how Hal Rothman would just go off on people about this stuff?
Oh yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And like this is kind of the same dynamic between local and academic history, right? It's that you have this like local history that the academic is not. He's still around. Yeah,
is not an academic, and he was never accepted into the realm of the academics. He was always a local historian.
He was never allowed to teach at UNLV, and that's the kind of dynamic that I feel like we still have with YouTube, right? That we have this kind of thing where we can bring in all this like cool information and really kind of challenge scholarly consensus on something, but in order to do so, we have to be accepted, and this kind of we can cite this stuff, but it becomes difficult. And how do we overcome that barrier? Not just in terms of like the obscure books that like nobody has access to anymore, but like but also just like kind of raising awareness and to new theories and stuff like that, while simultaneously trying to deal with the public.
Yeah.
Well, I as far as the finding books and all that goes, I just was going to mention about how just even a few years ago when I was working on my dissertation, the only person that studied that particular thing is this guy over here, and this is written in German, right? It's only in German. And so then you got to learn the German, and then you got to translate. Nowadays, you can take a PDF of the book, pop it into Google Translate, and you get the whole thing.
Yeah,
it's so much easier. Yeah,
it's like I like to say I'm terrible at German, but I am fluent in Google Translate.
which works okay unless you get a question from somebody in Croatia, and it has to go through Google Translate twice, and then it turns into garbage.
They don't do direct translation. Oh,
but yeah, I got a question from somebody in Croatia trying to ask me what this artifact was that they have, because they saw me on Pawn Stars and wanted me to tell them what the artifact was that they had in Croatia, because that's what I get from being on television. And after twice through Google Translate, it finally turned out to be a third level Catholic relic, and I was able to tell them what it was. But Google Translate is not a final be all and end all, but it's getting better.
No.
You have to know how to use it, right? But
I don't know.
But in terms of the larger question here, in terms of relaying that information and also being able to challenge scholarly consensus in that, right? Being able to take all these kinds of obscure works and go well past your weird little pigeonhole of like 150 scholars, and translate it to something that's entertaining for thousands of people. What is the thing that scholars really need to think about when engaging with new media like that?
I mean, yeah, I think they need to, like we've discussed, they need to be entertaining. That's sort of what it comes down to. They need to understand the medium that it is, which is much closer to television than it is to university education, or or anything like that, and not even much closer to television, but much closer to Pawn Stars than Ken Burns' The Civil War. You know what I mean? It's there is a it must be entertaining, and you must tell a story. I mean, that's just sort of kind of what it comes down to, and that's what people are going to. That's what people are looking at us for, right? That's what people are like going to HistoryTube, and maybe we talked about maybe defining that term. Maybe we should, but that's what they sort of come to us for, is like for stories, and it's got to be engaging. It's got to be entertaining. Otherwise, they're just not gonna care.
I think all history is going to include stories, right? Like that's, I mean, the way I think of the way I normally define history is the story of us, right? Story of humanity, but the story, as in like actually written, what's often called written history, but just call it history. But like, the story of us is a good way of framing it, because it's a true story. It's something that you have to like dig up. For ancient history, you have to dig up ancient papyri to find out that, like, oh yeah, the pyramids were actually built by like paid workers. Things like that. And like the only way you can build that story is by finding evidence and all that. And that's like what these obscure kind of things can do. To hit more on the question about like how we can challenge that, I think it's also important to say that you don't have to just be a narrative historian to do this stuff. I mean, I think a lot of my work is mostly analytical.
Yeah, no, you're right. It is. Yeah.
And like there is that kind of balancing act that you have to kind of go between narrative, because it's not history without narrative, right? You have to have narrative, but you can have that balancing act between like having more narrative or more analysis, right? You can forgo analysis altogether. Like you don't need analysis to be history, but you can do more analysis than narrative. And I think that's a good thing to kind of think about when we're talking about like how we can talk not only to the public, because no matter what, we're going to be talking to the public, but how we can talk to scholars and hopefully get them to engage.
Yeah. And I mean, there's also a question of whose story are you telling, right? It doesn't have to be great man history. It doesn't have to be those well-tread stories over and over again. I mean, there are other stories that you can tell, and they can, I mean, there is a big upside there in terms of, bringing in different kinds of audiences, right? If you tell more diverse stories, you're going to get more diverse YouTube viewers, right? And, that's always the difficult line, because, that's not necessarily the easy shortcut to, a huge follower count. But those are, I think, important, aspects of history to tell. And so there is that kind of tension between telling the really popular stories that everyone's told over and over again, and telling different kinds of stories.
Yeah, and that's another thing that we kind of have that responsibility, like especially if we have a following or regular viewers who kind of just like they'll watch anything you put out, which, believe it or not, I have a few. I don't know why I do, but and so, yeah, sometimes I will go out of my way and say, I'm going to cover something that is way out of my own comfort zone, but also something I'm never, like my audience would probably normally not seek out. But I think that that's incredibly important, because there's so much. I mean, the vast majority of history is forgotten. We all know this, but I think also we can't. Just because it's forgotten doesn't mean like it's not important. It's just because for various reasons, various factors, wasn't covered, and a lot of times it is power that drives whose story gets told and why it gets told and how much. Like, I know it's a cliche, but the winners write history, as they say. There's some truth to that. And I think we almost have an obligation to go out of our way to seek out those stories that are
I think it's important to point out when you're saying that, because God, I've heard that phrase way too many times used
Cypher. Let me tell you something. The Yankees and their industry and their Lincolnite tyranny is what wrote the history.
You didn't miss a beat there. I love it.
And like that's how often the whole victors write the history thing. But you know what? My dad kind of sitting up to do.
But you're totally right, though. You are right, though, Mr. B. Like there is there are power structures kind of like that do determine this stuff. And like again, sort of going back to
power. I mean, when you think about it, right? We're the ones who are deciding what goes out.
White dudes too.
So like, what does the public know about? Like, if we're choosing a topic, we're basically telling people that here's something you should know. Yeah. What we choose not to do, they don't know. So we're kind of like gatekeeping in a way. I mean, it's not intentional, like we're trying to gate, but I mean, whatever we collectively choose to present, that's what the world out there becomes familiar with. Yeah. And if we say, "Oh, that's boring, I'm not going to cover that," then they don't know about it.
That is exactly right. And I'll tell you that from the standpoint of somebody who ran museums for most of his career and worked in museums for his entire career. And I've been blamed or attacked for this for years. And I made a very conscious effort throughout my career to say, look, I am looking at my entire community, because I was looking at community museums. And I was looking at the San Luis Obispo County, the city of Anaheim, the women in Los Angeles. So I went from Indians in Los Angeles all the way up to 1982. That's when I did the exhibit, I made a point of covering as wide a group as I could within that. Yeah. And you have to make decisions all the way through, and you have to be very conscious of what you're doing, because you are the gatekeeper. You are the historian that are making all these decisions. So you are the one that are saying what stories you're telling and how you're telling those. Now, the fact is, you're going to tell interesting stories. That's all good. You want to do that. But as you're telling those stories, think of the ones that you might be missing. Good, bad, and indifferent. Sometimes you got to tell stories that aren't real good. The last building we opened at the Clark County Museum before I retired was the home of the first Black family that was allowed to live in Boulder City, Nevada. That was the first segregated community in Clark County. And that was a building that we saved. We moved to the museum. We moved it there 14 years before my guild could raise $250,000 to restore it. And we could then tell the story of how it was the home of the first Black family and how they were allowed to live there and how that color barrier was broken. And we did that on purpose because it was a story that needed to be told.
Yeah, and that kind of points out that, sometimes the inability to talk about a specific story, like that, you couldn't really talk about segregation in Boulder City without artifacts to tell that story with, right? And so that like, as you heard, is quite a costly project, and that's just to restore it. Getting it there was a whole other problem.
Oh yeah, we had spent that money 15 years ago,
and it's a cinder block building, so it doesn't move very easily.
It's wood, but it's a shack. But
I thought that was the cinder block. I don't know the different ones, but either way, it
doesn't matter.
In terms of museums, you have to tell stories with the objects that you have in the collection. You can't really tell stories if you don't have those objects. So, like, effectively, if you lose a collection, you've lost the ability to tell that story. But here on new media, we have different constraints. But we do have constraints. It's not unlimited. We can't just talk about anything, right?
Well, there's this is a rabbit hole we could go down indefinitely.
Right.
So maybe we won't sort of necessarily. I don't want to necessarily dwell on this, but obviously that what you were talking about, Mark, speaks to like a larger element of historiography in sort of our era, which is sort of the spotlight that's kind of suddenly being shown on these lesser known stories, especially in American history with marginalized groups and stuff like that. Something I've definitely dabbled in.
But I don't want to end on that. What I was trying to say is just I've been doing this for over 40 years. This wasn't something new. This is and this is for everyone. All of you, I think, have probably been thinking about this and doing this on your channels. I don't think you should beat yourselves up or think that you haven't been. This is one of the wonderful parts of public history. This is what we can do better in many cases than academic history, because we have much more of an openness and an ability, because we're the ones that are the gatekeepers. And I don't remember who said that. I think that may have been David that said gatekeepers.
Yeah.
Because we are those. We don't have to answer to anybody else. We don't have to go through a review process to get the book published. We don't have to get the class agreed to or any of that. We're the ones, you are all the ones who have the ability to say, I'm going to do this video, just as I have when I've been writing articles, because I've just published them wherever I chose to publish them. And it was, I think this is an interesting subject. I think I'll write the definitive history on bottle houses in the West, which I did. And
Nice.
You want to know about bottle houses? I can tell you. We started out in Tonopah, Nevada in 1902. Woo-hoo.
I've literally been in the car with him, and he's just driven off to the side of the road and been like, "Oh, look, a bottle house!" but
That's awesome.
And then ended up spending 2 hours in the middle of the desert because of that. But like this idea of gatekeeping and the choosing our subjects and that is interesting, because like something that a lot of people think about, like that a lot of scholars have pointed out, is that like every time there's a movie made, everybody wants to talk about it, right? When I talk about like race massacres and race riots and whatnot, I get people like really angry with me if I somehow don't talk about the Tulsa one, and it's like there's so much other stuff, and the only reason
now, isn't it?
It's because it's
is in Watchmen.
Well, we did just hit the centennial at the beginning of the month.
Yeah,
so there's that.
Right.
But like beyond that, it was actually more because the TV show Watchmen depicted it, and actually depicted it pretty accurately too.
I'm so glad that they did.
Surprisingly accurately. I mean, the firebombs were a bit like it's like those are like some of the most effective firebombs ever. But like it's a TV show. Who cares if they get that right?
Exactly.
And like beyond that one little thing, it was completely accurate. So like people who are like, wait, did this happen? And they go, internet, and then suddenly it's just like, I've never heard of this before. And it's like, and the one thing that I really hope to encourage from all this, from my channel, and that when I talk about these kinds of things, is to go like, it's not just that though. You think that was bad? Let's go to Wilmington, North Carolina.
Oof.
like
here, Liberty Place.
Liberty Place, or
Omaha, Nebraska,
or just north of there at the one that was that led to the Supreme Court one. I can't remember that. It's at a courthouse north of New Orleans. But like,
I forgot the name.
It led to U.S. v. Cruikshank. I can tell you the name of the case. I can't tell you the name of the battle. But like,
we don't want to talk about Chinatown in L.A. and
it's just like, oh man, that gets pretty nasty too. Or the one up in Idaho, and it's like, that's the point. Is that like, I think a lot of what we can do good is kind of not just be like, here is the story of X, because that kind of like, that has a beginning, middle, and end. Once you get to the end, you're done, right?
Yeah.
But I think we can often like really point to like, hey, there's more to this. I like to call that implied nuance. You don't really get to talk about all the nuances, but you just kind of hint at it by saying like most of X or something like that. You never put in the definitive or you don't put in the superlatives. You know, it's not,
because you can't speak for everyone.
And you can't say like this is the worst thing that ever happened, because then you just go like, well, what about this or what about that? And it's like, and that's exactly the attitude you want to encourage. Is as soon as they hear like first, really,
if you're a real historian, you should start shaking as soon as you start hearing a superlative. Because there's always something else out there. We've got a medievalist, and we've got an ancientist. I mean, I'm sorry, things have been happening for a very long time. And us modernists are latecomers to the scene.
Totally.
Yeah, I avoid it all costs on my the greatest channel on YouTube.
You're the first channel, the very first one.
No, just kidding.
But I did like what you were saying, Mark, about like casting a very wide net. Something I try to do like very consciously is try to sort of appeal to the most people possible. And sometimes with a lot of American history topics, you kind of have to like, you want anybody to be able to, no matter their age or their ethnic background or their like political beliefs, you want them to be able to sort of like sit down, or their country of origin, and be able to like watch your video and sort of get something from it, right? And not sort of necessarily feel alienated. And a lot of the time, that sort of that involves kind of getting into those sorts of gnarly sort of we're sort of overturning those stones, right? That have kind of been sort of, that have not been overturned much, because sometimes you kind of need to do that in order to cast a very, very wide net. In order to sort of, because somebody might say, oh, well, I'm Polish. What about the Poles in Boston in the 1870s? You know what I mean? Just like that, sort of, it behooves us to try to be as broad as possible in just trying to sort of, and as inclusive as possible, and trying to tell as many people's stories as possible, and trying to like show events from as many perspectives as possible. And that isn't always possible, because there's time constraints, there's a million other things. Sometimes it's just like we have no time for that, in the words of Martin Sheen. But I think that is like something that's a good thing to, even though I personally don't always kind of achieve that as much as I would like, I strive for that.
I think we need to also recognize we are talking to the public. They are not historians. We are not going to make them historians. We are merely telling stories. We need to tell them accurately. What I do on television, and I have really, as much as I've been given a hard time, even by my son at times, about being on Pawn Stars and all these other shows that I've shown up on, 10 Things You Don't Know About American History, America Facts and Fallacies, all these other shows. A lot of them are really not great shows. I will admit that. But I will go on any one of them except
Ancient Aliens?
No, Myths and
Mythbusters?
Mythbusters I would go on. They actually did it.
No, they're pretty cool. Yeah.
There was another one that I did 3 of, and the third one they screwed up so badly I won't go back on them.
Oh, anyway, the one that's about like ghost stuff.
No, I didn't do that one. Oh God, I'll never go on a ghost one. Anyway,
called like Mysteries at the Museum or something like that.
Yeah, Mysteries at the Museum. Mysteries at the Museum. The third one of those, they screwed up so badly I will never go on again. Anyways, and that's a different whole issue that I can talk to you about, your own how you control how you are on the old media. But the whole thing is we have to also recognize, and you have to recognize in terms of how you're putting out what you're doing, is you're not going to make your viewers historians. You are putting out history. You have to be accurate. You have to put out what you are putting out accurately as you can. You have to be careful when you are putting out your opinion. and you have to be clear on what you are saying as opinion as opposed to history. All that everybody was saying about the 6th is a good example of that. There was opinion in that, there was history in that. And that's a real mixed bag at this point. There's a lot we know, there's a lot we don't know. We have to be very careful in everything that we say when we put stuff out. There's a lot of that in the past as well. That's why we do our history, we do our research.
I will point out that it's often pretty difficult to especially on YouTube, unless you're putting like big old red thing saying at the bottom being like opinion part.
No. But you can say it in a way that is more clear and less clear. But
in my opinion, yeah.
And you actually Atunche. I don't know how you pronounce it. I'm trying. I used to call you attention.
I mispronounced
it. It's easy. It's ancient Akkadian. No, it's made up.
Well, of course it is. Goddamn, I should know that. That's what they say on the oil rigs. The Creoles say on the oil rigs. That's the only thing I know about off of New Orleans. Anyways,
that comes from New Orleans. I've been hearing that for ages. Okay.
That's a statement that's said by
everything you love about America comes from New Orleans.
No,
including race massacres.
No, it's all the humidity that I hate about America. But it's just one of those things that all of us that work in public history, but especially when you're dealing with YouTube, and you guys all do a great job. Because I've gone out, I've looked at your channels, and you actually do a great job. But all of us that work in public history really need to think about the fact that we are not going to make our viewers historians. A very few we will. Some people that have watched me have said, I want to go into history because I think history is cool. I want to go into museum work because that's cool. That's thrilling to me. That is a wonderful thing. I think, Mr. Beat, if somebody watches what you do and they say, I want to be an historian, I'll bet you are just smiling from ear to ear. I'll bet you, Mark, on alliterative, that if somebody says, I want to be a medievalist, you are probably just saying, I did it. I got somebody else. I got somebody else. I watched your thing on the first English word today. I looked that one up. I watched it, and I'm thinking, when you're asking, well, does it have to be chronological? That's a great piece on non-chronological history. You're asking, does it have to be? No, it doesn't have to be chronological. That's a great piece that's not chronological, and it's almost not. I'm listening to you pronouncing words. I'm going, I have no idea what you just said, but I can read it and go, okay, I got that.
So Dan, you're hinting at a larger thing. Is
I'm glad I am.
Is that there is this there is a kind of because we a lot of this has been geared towards trying to engage scholarship with history and get history tubers engaging with that. New media needs to engage with the ivory tower and vice versa. But we can also be kind of a pipeline towards getting people involved in scholarship themselves, especially. I get people. I was just told today that in an email, I had literally an entire faculty from it's one of the New York colleges. I think it's City College. One of them, it said basically, can you please finish these YouTube? Because I've been doing these YouTube shorts on historiography, and they were like, can you please finish this up and get this done with, because we want to use it, and it's like, I've had contact with the department there a few times, but the they're not only using it in the classroom, they're using it to like kind of bolster people who want to like go into history and that. And like I absolutely love every time I get an email or something along those lines of like, thank you for doing this. I'm now a history major. I'm using this in the classroom. I'm guessing that Mr. Beat is probably the one that has the most videos used in the classroom here, because you have the most like kind of neutral oh, hey, it's Stefan.
Supreme Court videos. Yeah. That's a good thoughts on why YouTube history is such a white man's game. I was actually going to bring that up earlier.
Oh, it's somebody asking that?
Stefan.
Oh, yeah. I didn't read it. Sorry, I'm trying to do a lot of things at once here. And yes, we need to definitely talk about this because this is a huge problem, and we were kind of hinting at that earlier. But before we get into that, let's talk about like why scholars need to engage with HistoryTube and that as a because that's how you kind of bring people into the profession as well.
Yeah,
and how do we make it so that it isn't so white? Because we need to diversify the profession, especially on YouTube. It is particularly white. I mean, like, even you can see it in the faces of us, right? We're all white, and like that's a problem. That means that we have we grew up in a particular way. We don't know the kind of oppressions that people face and that kind of thing. We don't know what it's like to be marginalized for our race. We're also men, so we don't know that. And how do we not only get how do we not only encourage people to start going into the profession through our videos and that, and maybe joining us on YouTube, but how do we get people who are more diverse than us? Because just from the faces of this panel, I invited people based on their academic background and that, but like the fact is, there's just not a lot of people of color, and I don't think there's any women who are history. Oh wait, there is a girl who is 16, I think, long ago or something like that. But
there's Raven.
There's a few.
David, I know you
Raven's an archaeologist, though.
Yes, true. That overlaps with what I do, but yeah. There's Classics in Color is another ancient history channel. And she's kind of up and coming. I think she's got like 3,500 subscribers, but she's very good. Mark Graves. And then what else? I'm trying to remember now. But yeah, you know what it is? It's like just in the profession itself, it's been largely a white man's game for so long. And it's only in more recent times that they've been diversifying. It may also be that YouTube in general has a lot of white guys doing channels just in any subject.
It does. I think YouTube skews more male. I think podcasts, it's probably a little better. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a general thing. I mean, if you look at your analytics,
I have like 95% men watching my channel.
Yeah, and I think part of that is like, hell, I would guess that the person who has had the most diverse in terms of people of color and female viewership on here would actually be my dad, because it's YouTube. YouTube has this weird thing about like we've had a few women try to enter the HistoryTuber space before. Mr. Beat, you might remember, the various attempts, right? And that women often come in, and especially women, as soon as they come in, because you can't even hide behind a microphone with that, is because as soon as they hear your voice, they know that you're a girl, and suddenly just the bigotry goes to the nth level, right? Like, we deal with enough bigotry, and we're all white dudes. I don't.
I will say this: every time I release a female-centric video, the views will be guaranteed down. Like, it will not be. And And I
There's ways of doing it though, because I did one that, I mean, it wasn't really female centric. Well, I did I did a video on the history of feminism. Actually, like in the video,
but that's going to bring a lot of
well,
trolls.
that was so
Well,
part of it is actually like purposely, like trolling the trolls, right? Because I think at the beginning of the video, I come in like, I'm going to indoctrinate you into feminism, but like it actually is just like a history of feminism, and it's like, here's the differences between the first wave, second wave, third wave, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And like that's what it's really about.
Yeah.
And by the way, speaking of family members, and that the sociologist I refer to, why am I putting that in air quotes? It's she's an actual sociologist, but the sociologist on there that I referred to multiple times is my mother.
Yeah. And Mr. Beat, your video about like male reactions to women's suffrage is amazing. I love that video. And you have your like your friends who are women, your friends who are girls, kind of read these quotes and react to them. And and that's sort of and this is completely off topic at all. And I apologize. I've had a few Paradise Park seltzers, so I'm talkative.
It's not,
but there's
it's not necessarily though. Because you're hinting at something that we were getting at here, is that like not only how do we get more people involved, but how do we get more diverse people involved? And do those videos actually bring like possibly inspire women or people of color to do this, or does that do the opposite? Like do they see the hate that flows from that comment section and go like, I don't want to be part of this?
I think we have a weird skewed we have a skewed kind of perspective on the comment section. Like I think most people, they just kind of scroll through it a little bit and maybe they read the first like 10 or 20, which, generally, I mean, YouTube, and to be fair, I feel like YouTube comments have gotten better over time. Like they used to just be like, just the vilest stuff. And it still is very violent at a lot of points, but I feel like the cream kind of rises to the top in a lot of ways. And the top comments are generally going to be either easy jokes or actually constructive / positive comments.
Or the 20 people who say first.
Yes.
There's a lot of people in the comments. If you've been looking at the chat, there's all these people shouting out all these great female-oriented history channels.
Yeah,
I think we might be in our own little bubbles. Like I know my wife, Mrs. Beat, she's a big fan of Bernadette Banner.
Actually, yeah.
She's a fashion YouTuber, right?
But it's fashion history.
There is.
Yeah, I noticed somebody said that. It's basically like there's a lot of like big channels about fashion history. And, and I watched a number of those, and they're awesome. Yeah.
There's also like she's in the HistoryTuber Slack, but she also doesn't make very videos very often because of personal reasons. But like Articulations, I think is her name, is the channel name. And she does art history. Now, art history is often, you'll find a lot of historians who kind of go, I don't know if art history counts as history. But
it's
like
history.
It is totally. But you're totally right.
It depends on the way you do it. But the way she does it, yes.
But you are totally right that like I feel like there is sort of, and maybe this is our own biases kind of coming into play here, where at least kind of with us, and I know all of us are, deeply feeling human beings, and there's more to us than this. But there is, I feel like, a big section of the sort of white dude history nerd scholar community that's like, if massive amounts of blood isn't being shed, then it's not history. It's not history.
I have people.
Where are my wheel locks? Where are my flint locks? I'm sorry. Where are my percussion caps? I'm sorry, I don't see any machine guns. No, not history.
I've had people complain in seminar because, I mean, I'm a historian of American violence. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not military history. I'm not true crime or any of that kind of stuff. I'm more about like, wait, there was this one time when a bunch of county commissioners decided to kill each other?
Yeah. Of course, in the Old West style, yes, of course, yeah. Yeah,
I'm actually referring specifically to Grand Lake, Colorado in 1884, but 1882, I think. sometime in the 1880s. But the
Sounds like an historian.
but I've actually had people go like, do you just like sniff blood and start going after it or something? Like in class, I've had people say that, and it's true. It is kind of what I do. Is like as soon as I hear like, wait, that happened, I smell blood and go, huh? And
no, I do too. And maybe that's something that like we need to work on, And I think Stefan, the legend, is probably gone now because I know you said he was dipping out. But yeah, he brought up a very good point about sort of the Eurocentrism and.
But let's why don't you all take a step back and realize that you're not responsible for all of YouTube. There are 5 of you here. You're not responsible for and I say this as somebody who in the mid-70s was in graduate school and listening to a doctor of history who was trying to diversify the museum field and was doing his damnedest to bring people of color and mainly people of color into the museum field, which is still a decidedly white and now much more female field than male field, except in the area of directors. And it didn't, he was not successful. He tried. He was offering scholarships and all kinds of things, but he couldn't figure out ways of opening up the field. There are times when we all look at ourselves and say, what can we do? Well, sometimes it's not always up to us. We can, when we see somebody, we can say, what can we do for you?
But you might actually have a good example within your own field, because when you retired, one, a woman replaced you, and 2, your staff was made up of yourself, a dude, and 2 women. Yeah, so you've managed to actually cultivate a rather, I mean, they were all white, but like, in a museum field made out of 4 people, that you can't exactly expect all the diversity, but you managed to bring in 2 women into the museum, and so what did you do that we could possibly implement?
I hired the best.
Well, we can't hire people.
No, but that was what we can do. We can bring them on for a collab or an interview or things like that, right? You can. So we can't do anything about us, our channel, but we can have people on our channel, or we can do things with people who have other channels that help promote them. If they're smaller than us and we want to send some people over there, talk about them. And so I think there's things we can do to assist in that regard, right?
That's huge. I mean, think about it. I mean, when you look at the 5 of you, all of you have followers. If you find somebody that's got a good channel, do a collaboration. Collaboration. Wrong word. I know. But you support each other, and you find somebody that's out there that's doing something. If you find a person of color that's got a channel that maybe only has 1,000 viewers, bring them on your channel. Do a collab with them. How much that can make a channel blow up and become successful. But
I owe your son my livelihood, Mark.
Don't do it just because they're a person of color or a woman. Do it because they're a good channel.
Exactly.
Yes.
And that's the way to do it. I have supported people. I've mentored people within the museum field. I have people calling me, even though I'm retired. They have my number, and they are young people in the field, and they call me here at the house. Women young people, I don't, it doesn't matter to me. I just want to support them as people coming up in the field. I've always done that.
Sure. Yeah.
The other thing that I have to point out is that there are actually now a large majority of women in museology, right? It's something like 60%, right?
It has come up to 60%. It wasn't when I came into the field.
Oh yeah, it was like it was vastly majority men back in the 70s, but
it was. But it is now a majority. However, not as directors. They as directors, it is still a vast majority male. So they're moving up to directors, but
well, you just fixed that. At least at your own institution.
I'm doing my part.
This is like something that deeply concerns me, at least, is how not only how do we get more scholars, but like also how do we get more diverse scholars? Because like, for instance, in terms of people of color, there's From Nothing. He's does African history. He's I assume black, but I'm just going off of a cartoon. But like, there's articulations. Check out her channel. She does art history. She does really cool architecture history, especially. But like, it's not that art history where it's purely insular art history. It's actually looking a little bit bigger. But then you do have all those like fashion, like historic fashion YouTubers, which they're kind of in their own little niche, right? They're kind of like the same thing as like what do you call them, the people, the reenactor YouTubers, the ones that like Shadiversary and Lindy Beige and those kinds. Like they're less about like those ones are less about
material
like,
culture.
Yeah.
Which is definitely kind of valuable, and it is interesting. That's sort of an interesting thing too, isn't it? That like the fashion YouTubers are very kind of female. That sounds like weird incel shit. They're just like primarily run by women, and usually
you can tie those in very strongly to a lot of your subjects. And
I was just gonna say that. Yeah, exactly. That there is sort of like, and that I feel like it is sort of like these two separate worlds, where it's sort of like fashion YouTube. It's just like, whatever Victorian dresses or, 17th century waistcoats or whatever it is. And then you have kind of the reenactor community, which is just as painstakingly sort of has that attention to detail, but because it has this kind of martial military association, it's kind of more sort of dominated by men. But these two worlds are very, very sort of similar, and they kind of do collide in a lot of ways. And of course, it is the sort of, and going to use a loaded term here, but a very apt one, I think, in many scenarios. But sort of the intersectionality of a lot of these disciplines, where you find kind of the most complete sort of picture of history, where you can talk about the gear of a British soldier in the American War of Independence, or you can talk about the sort of, I watched a great fashion history video the other day about like female self-defense, about like pins and stuff.
So what would it have been like for a woman in King Philip's War?
So, exactly. Yeah.
So with all of this being said, David needs to go soon. We don't need to go, but David is on the East Coast, and Eastern time is a lot later than us. Also, some of us are late birds. He is not. So, David, I wanted to give you a chance to kind of like give your final remarks before you go or anything. Like what do you think in terms of, we've been talking a lot about like bringing in more diverse scholars, but also just like bringing in scholars. What are the hurdles, all of that kind of stuff? What do you think in terms of just like a concluding remark?
I think there aren't that many YouTubers who are also PhDs in history, but there are a lot of history YouTubers, and I don't want to put those channels down. I think those channels are great, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that scholars can be encouraged to come on to those channels or whatever, so like I know a lot of people do that, like they'll interview scholars, they'll have scholars on, and I think that's a way for scholars to be on YouTube without being YouTubers, right? Because we're not saying like, oh, well, if you're a scholar you need to be on YouTube. We just want them to reach out more, right? We just want them to kind of be public facing a little bit more. And in particular, one of the things that Ott and Shay and I were talking about is correcting misinformation when it's necessary and things like that. But I mean, without having to be a YouTuber, scholars can still be more involved by making appearances every now and then, or saying yes when they're invited, to be on channels.
That's I've invited a few that are just like, I don't want to show my face, but like how do we do you think?
But not everyone wants to be. Not everyone is comfortable with that. So I don't think we can shame them, or unnecessarily pressure them. But I think we should just encourage it.
Yes, absolutely.
When we can. Yeah,
absolutely.
It's fun, right?
Yeah,
I have fun. I enjoy it.
Well, as soon as you start, wait until that one viral video, and then you'll be a little bit more ambivalent.
Still waiting on that one,
but David, it is always a pleasure. You are, in the words of Stefan Milo, a true legend. And are you going to watch?
I think he said that about himself, but.
Oh well, yes. But I'm saying it about. Are you going to watch?
No, he was saying about you, of course.
Yes, I am. Yes, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, Ott and Shay and I might be doing another collaboration. So.
Yes. I'm forcing David to watch terrible movies that I inexplicably love. But it was awesome talking to you, David.
It's
you
great
too, everybody.
You on.
Thank you.
Everyone, be sure to check out his channel. Is linked in the description.
World of Antiquity. Check it out.
World of Antiquity.
The very
You'll
first.
Be very welcome there.
Let's give him that one freaking viral video. make him learn what the downside of YouTube really is.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it very much and being involved in the conversation.
Been a pleasure.
All right.
It's always a pleasure.
See you, everybody.
Good night.
So, to get back on topic and everything, I hope that you guys still have some time. Be sure to let me know if you need to go or anything, or if we need to end this anytime soon. We've been on here for almost 3 hours, so hopefully we can get the last couple questions figured out.
Yeah, we may want to wrap up pretty soon. I mean, I stay up till 4 a.m. every night, so I don't care. But,
I'm actually kind of the same way.
I was filming in my living room, and this, this is just for the night owls and to drum up some hype. I was filming in my living room today and yesterday, which is the set of a certain. It's not where I usually film, but it is where I sometimes film. It is the set of a certain series of mine. I was filming there today. I took over the whole house. And so now my girlfriend banished me to our room here, to our bedroom. So, and it doesn't look like this. I just put up these swords and stuff to look like a history.
Just to put spears and swords.
This wall just does not look history enough. So this is all lies. It's all show business. It's all lies.
You should see what's in the closet behind my dad.
Yeah.
There's all.
But yes, I do have.
That's the sword closet.
Yeah, that's the sword closet.
I'm not joking. That is the sword closet.
I have a coat closet, not a sword closet. I don't get one of those.
Sorry.
I think I have 2 swords stored in there, maybe 3, but not.
Gotta have some swords. So.
Next time we storm a castle, I know who to go to.
But to get this back on target and everything, I think this is kind of a perfect time to move over to the next kind of larger question. And while we've been talking about how do we bring scholars on and all that, and we've talked a little bit about barriers of entry, in terms of technology and whatnot, and also just like the barrage of hatred. I think we should also talk about how we can change scholarly perception of YouTube. How do we change? How do we? We've been talking about how do we get people on here, but like a lot of that has just been like make good videos. But like that's really difficult. I mean, I've been trying to really extend this question a bit. I've been trying to change scholarly perceptions in this for a while. I went to the National Council on Public History in the United States. Went to it. I went to it in 2020. Mr. B was actually with me on that. We were supposed to go to Georgia, the home of the Center for Disease Control, but then something happened that involved that particular agency that made us not able to go there anymore. And so we ended up making videos about this. I actually turned my video into something that I put on my channel, but it was Matt, Mr. Beat, myself, and Tristan from Step Back History. Mr. Beat covered pedagogical, like the pedagogical value of YouTube. I covered the scholarly value of YouTube, and Tristan covered the kind of activist value of history on YouTube. Okay. Matt, Mr. Beat, did you actually publish your video? I don't think you did.
No, I didn't. I probably should. It's not very good. But
you should polish it off. It was a good presentation, at least. But like put it into your style. With the slick background and the text kind of like floating down and all that.
Yeah.
It'd be a great video. But beyond that, that's us like actively going to these kinds of scholarly gatekeepers. The National Council on Public History is probably it's bigger than AAM, right, Dan? Or AASLH?
AASLH, not AAM.
AAM's big. So AAM is the American Alliance now.
Of Museums.
Yeah. Used to be association. But I don't know why they did that. But anyways, the American Alliance of Museums is also another one. But like the going to these things like the National Council on Public History and that kind of stuff is a way of engaging it. But how do we do that through new media? How do we do it on Twitter? How do we do it on Facebook, YouTube, all the other things? How do we change scholarly perception of YouTube? Because I mean, I can tell you there's a pretty dim view of it with a lot of scholars, even from ones who are invested in this whole idea of diversifying the profession, going to other things. How do we change that?
Well, one thing you can do is, again, there is that institutional problem, but if you can push your professional associations to have things like new media awards, right? Which costs them nothing. It's just for the sort of honor of being named.
Could you explain what that means?
So, if you're part of a professional society, if you can convince them to give an award, a yearly award, to an academic who does new media as sort of public-facing scholarship, that's something that you can put as a line on a CV. That's something that you can put in your annual report every year.
I'm going to step away because my cat just started toppling stuff. It's Crazy Kitty hour now. So I will be back in just a second. I'm also going to grab another beer. But keep on going.
Yeah. So if you could do that, that raises the profile of new media in the eyes of administration, first of all, because they love to see things that, administrations are already on board with you appearing, on a radio, interview or something like that. They already think that's pretty good publicity for the university. So if you can convince them that new media has a similar level of, good publicity for the university, and they're already on board with that and will value that kind of work, I think that's a big step towards making the world of academia appreciate, doing this kind of public scholarship. And it will also, hopefully, I think that's the harder battle, to get your colleagues to appreciate it, right? Colleagues, I think, are probably a harsher critic to doing, new media in terms of, is it valued? The admin, they're thinking, what's good PR? So I think they're an easier audience to kind of convince. But your colleagues in, your other academics are probably going to be a little harder to convince, especially if you're at a really research intensive institution. They're gonna, they always want to find a reason to look down on the competition, right? And so if they can dismiss you as someone who just does public scholarship and doesn't do serious scholarship or whatever, they're gonna latch onto those things. But I think the key is to raise the profile of new media, within the academic world, so that more scholars will be willing to do it themselves.
Yeah, I like that idea of the award and that. I mean, the thing, like my most selfish goal on this would be to make the work I do on my channel count towards tenure.
Yeah,
like that would be the ultimate goal. Get me tenure. Well, everything else doesn't matter. But
when I was in grad school, I took a class like how to make educational videos, and I got credit for it. I mean, it's not like all. This was part of my. It was a like specifically history education class. It was through Emporia State. It's a small public university in Kansas, but I mean, I think already like a lot of colleges are being more open to this. And also I wanted to say, like, I just remember when I started teaching and YouTube was still mostly, just random viral videos, like cat videos and stuff like that. Like think about 2010, when I was first a full-time teacher, and how most teachers at the time, they would think it would be crazy to show a YouTube video to their own students for education, and then flash forward to just a few years later, because YouTube was blocked in almost every school. YouTube was blocked until just maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago that started to change.
When I was substitute teaching, it was like that, and I remember being really annoyed because it was 2013, 2014 that I was substitute teaching, and like there was some really good stuff that it could have worked. And
so I think that I don't know. I think the stigma is no longer there like it used to be, and I think we're already seeing this change. I think that we're seeing more and more historians and actual professors that are making content, but I do think that the challenge remains that it doesn't mean it's good. and so I think I used to be all about just like up until 2017, I was all about just like there's all this stuff in textbooks that needs to be taught as part of the curriculum in classrooms across the country. And therefore I need to transfer it there so it's accessible to all these students. I remember a big shift in my mentality about 2017. I think it was actually around the time I went to VidCon, the very first VidCon I went to.
I missed that one.
And where I met Mark. But I think I met you the year after that, Cypher. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I missed that one.
2017, that's like when a light bulb went off in my head. I was like, why am I focusing so much on textbooks and curriculum? I just need to... that's where I completely shifted to just curiosity based. You can get to the important information. There's a way to get there from A to B. You want to get to B at some point, But why not start with this to reel them in? And you know what? Like we want to hit controversial topics because it's gonna get people in that would never even think about learning history.
Yeah, I started the political polarization series specifically because I knew that it would be controversial, and I knew that it would actually bring in new viewers in that, but not only because it would be controversial, but because I knew that I would be able to hit it in a way that would make people think. Because my ultimate goal is to, because I mean, every time you hear about political polarization, people boil it down to like one particular thing. It's like, the Republicans have been so extreme, or filter bubbles on, or freaking cancel culture or something like that. It's always this like really new thing that, and then it's like no, let's talk about like how political parties were shifting in the 1960s. And it's like,
I thought that those videos did a great job just demonstrating how that shit had been just boiling for a while. And I'm still researching for my tech. Like I just finished one of the books for. It's gonna take forever to. For those, I know there's a lot of my viewers in here who are wondering. It's going to take me a long time to make that technology episode for the last of the episodes, because I don't really know what I'm talking about when it comes to that. I have to research a lot, and it's going to take a while. And I've got other things to do that are much more important, especially my dissertation. But I want to point out DC guy here. It is pointing out something interesting that I think is worth hitting on, especially for scholars. This idea of like changing the perception for scholars. So he's talking about like how like teachers often kind of have to, he calls it intellectual prostitution, but like how teachers often have to like kind of say like, hey, I'm teaching, you just took the first half of American history. How about you take the second half and, the second half, and I can tell you firsthand that, so there are, when it comes to professors in my department, we have a pretty large faculty actually, and then a much bigger adjunct staff and all that. But beyond that, there are 2 professors. Only 2 of them that are more popular than me. Think about that. I am not even a professor. I am an instructor. And yet I can pull in a class more quickly than most other professors. And it's purely because of this channel. Dad, you can, my dad can talk about how when he started doing the Pawn Stars shtick, like it ended up basically doubling attendance to the Clark County Museum.
It doubled the attendance. I ended up being the most searched term for Clark County. I was more searched than the Marriage Bureau for Las Vegas and Clark County.
Wow.
And I'm the museum
I don't know what to think about that when it's my dad.
Sorry,
it's very weird.
But the question that I always ask myself is, like, what are the scientists doing that we're not, right?
Because that's a good question.
They're really killing it in terms of new media and that bridging between the academic side and the.
So they have a special term for this, whereas like mind you,
psychom.
Yes, scientific communication. Although, point of order, look at this guy, more famous than any SciComm person,
except for Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Say for I guess Neil deGrasse Tyson, or Carl Sagan.
Yeah.
Bill Nye. But like those are literally like the biggest names. He's just
the biggest names, yeah.
He's literally just
Bill Nye is not a scientist. I'm sorry.
He now is. he now is, Dad. He actually he's
Did he finally get a degree?
No, I didn't get a degree, but
he had a degree in chemical engineering or something.
Yeah, he's an engineer.
Yeah.
He's an engineer by training, but you know what he did do?
What?
He administered the solar sail project. He is the administrator of that. Like you
I
cannot.
only ran museums for 44 years. I'll give him that one.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like saying to you, like, oh, well, you're not a historian because you don't have a graduate degree.
Yeah.
I mean,
But
that's
I
essentially what you're saying to him.
I didn't think he had a degree in science. I didn't realize he had.
He's got an engineering degree. That's
Yeah, no, I'll give him that one.
But back to your point,
But yeah,
you know, we all know you from Pawn Stars, and
Right.
like I think that's really that we can learn a lot from that. The fact that like I think that and we shouldn't be afraid to like put ourselves out there, like and get out of our comfort zone in terms of just like selling not just ourselves and our channels, but just history, like and like being passionate about it. Like I'm giving a little presentation at my local historical, or it's a local history museum. Actually, no, it's not. It's a Watkins History Museum. Check it out if you're in Lawrence, Kansas City area. But stuff like that, like to go out there, you got to go out there, and I think like Pawn Stars gets a lot of crap, but they do over the years they have accidentally taught some people some history. Like I hate to admit it,
accidentally.
You know, there's and that's the thing. There's not just me, but there have been a number of other folks on there that really do know their stuff.
Yes,
and they have stepped out there. They have spoken out and talked about what they really did know. And if you notice on Pawn Stars, there have been people on there that didn't know their stuff, and they ain't on there anymore. They are gone. And but the whole point is, and you see that on you talk about YouTube history. There's a lot of folks out there on YouTube history that don't know their stuff.
Yeah,
and do garbage history. So you can trash Pawn Stars history, but there's a lot of other stuff on the History Channel that is garbage.
Well, you're also
ancient aliens in that. I'm sorry.
You're also one of the only historians who have ever appeared on that show, so there's that. But
yeah,
beyond that,
anything.
Hey guys, I'm sorry to cut in. I gotta go. I got a jet.
Oh, you want? I'm sorry, I didn't see your private chat.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I just gotta go like right now. But
I was going to say, you want to have some sort of concluding.
Well, I just wanted to echo real quick what alliterative Mark said, that sort of kind of hope for the future. I do think that things are changing. I do think that, the British Museum has a channel. I think especially kind of over in Europe, there's a lot of, it is really good. There's sort of, and there are local, in fact, I keep getting recommended like some local kind of West Country English historical society, some weird museum. Hey, Sal, you want to say hi? Sal wants to say hi. And it's got weird, like, Matthew Hopkins witch hunt / kind of Anglo-Saxon Dark Age history. And it's got some like actors reading primary sources and like giving dramatic readings. And it's awesome. And I think it is kind of slowly changing, but I do think that academia kind of needs to catch up. But I'm really glad we had this conversation, and the two Marks, it was awesome meeting you, Mr. Beats, longtime fan. It was amazing getting to talk to him. And yeah, I gotta fucking go. But yeah, thank you, and Cypher, thank you so much for hosting and doing everything. You're awesome.
Love doing this kind of stuff. I want to do more of these things. I love doing these things, and obviously, there's a lot more to talk about this. But
yeah, for sure.
I'll let you go. Also,
right.
Mr. Beat is also needing to go soon. Am I detecting that it's all the central, the central time? Folks?
Mark, you're in central. You're in Eastern time.
No, I'm Eastern. Yeah.
Oh,
wow.
I'm a night owl, so.
Oh, okay.
This is actually pretty early for me still.
But I think we have hit a lot in terms of trying to change scholarly perception, and that there's a lot more to go over on that. If
I was going to add something to what you were saying.
Well, I think Matt needs to get going here, so I want to give him the chance to duck out. Mr. B, you want to say some sort of concluding remarks?
Sure. one other quick point is just I think that kind of to echo Atun Shy, I mispronounced it too.
Shay.
Shay, dang it! I always say.
The first time I shouted him out on my channel, I called him Atunchi.
That's okay.
And it took me like 3 months until somebody literally it took me 3 months before somebody actually said like, hey, you mispronounced his name. I'm like, wait, really? I talked to him over the phone before this.
You still brought lots of viewers to his channel, so but anyway, what his optimistic tone about new media, I think I really think that, back to our earlier discussion about how most of history is forgotten, and there are a lot of voices who have been silenced. And I think that new media gives us the best path towards lifting up those voices that have not been traditionally heard in history. So, and we all have our weird niches almost. I think Cypher and I kind of, actually alliterative too, a lot, we kind of are fairly broad compared to most YouTube channels. Most YouTube channels have become very narrow. You'll notice, I've kind of been known as the president guy or American political history guy, but I also dive into other stuff too randomly. So
you were the president guy because you were doing those election videos for so long.
Yeah, and the president's songs. But I guess my point is that there are so many, every day there are new history channels, and I'm amazed by how narrow they are, more and more narrow. And it's great because I think they're all finding these audiences all over the world, and it's stuff that typically was never covered by, the History Channel, because why would they? Back to what I said at the beginning of our discussion, they were all about lowest common denominator stuff to get ratings, and us small YouTubers, we just don't have to worry about that. Well, we kind of do. It would be nice to make some revenue, but yeah. So to conclude, I would say that this new media continues to be exciting for, I think, the entire social sciences field overall, and I think we should all be optimistic.
Yeah,
thanks for having me.
No, it's been great. You've been on every one of these.
Yeah. We're going to get sick of each other. Oh, yeah, I'm going to see you tomorrow. I'm going to see you tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. It's like, what? Oh, yeah. Because we get to talk about critical race theory.
Ooh.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be interesting because also I didn't hear about critical race theory until 2021. I didn't know what the heck it was. But anyways, that's for another channel and another time. So glad to have you on, Miss Pete. For those who aren't already subscribed to him, why not? Go down there. It's in the description. Check him out, as with everyone else on this, except for my dad, who does not have a YouTube channel. But you can subscribe to me as well.
Good to meet you, Mr. B.
Nice to meet you, too. Good to see you all.
Good night, man.
All right.
So... Oh, it's like suddenly we're
different layout here.
Yeah, and now it's not focusing on me. There we go. So I want to inch towards the end at least. We can carry this on as long as you guys want to. I think
it's probably getting close to the end.
Yeah. I was getting that too. The only question we didn't cover is what the difference between academic and public historians' engagement with public history, but I don't think we really need to cover that tonight. But I think it's an interesting question to ask, and something for the audience to at least think of. But let's move towards finishing this up.
I wanted to back up what Mark had said. I think you're absolutely correct that a major step would be if the YouTubers who are within academia could get involved with the academic organizations and push and find a place on the committees that set up awards, because I know I sat on a couple of academic or museum organizations award committees, and setting up awards for public history, for public history awards would be a great way to get more focus on, YouTube history within academia. That was a great idea within academia. It's something that outside of academia, it's not something that would be recognized. It's an internally facing way of understanding academia and understanding how to get academia to understand the public facing role of YouTube and public facing efforts. Because you're right, the academia doesn't understand what's being done with something that you're doing. I mean, I can't imagine that within your colleagues in medievalist scholarship that they would understand a video, your video work, your YouTube channel. They would, as you're talking to them at a scholarship conference, and you say, yes, I've got 50,000 subscribers to my channel looking at my videos, and they would say, huh?
Yeah.
I can just imagine that, because I know I get that when I get people understanding within the museum field, oh, I see you on television, but I get that among young people. I don't get that among long-term members of the museum field.
Mm-hmm.
The young people in the museum field are really pleased at what I do in traditional media. They don't understand what I do within the long-term members, the elders within the field, like I am, don't understand what I do. And it's kind of interesting, because I will have these youngsters that are coming up in the field going, oh, can I take a picture with you? And the other people who have gray hair like I do are going, eh?
I remember when I came, because when Pons, for those who haven't seen my whole, I think it's called My Story Thus Far, or whatever the episode's called, is where I talk about this. I didn't, the whole Pawn Stars things happened while I was in Afghanistan. So I literally came, I remember talking on the phone with you and you describing it, going I'm just like, well, that sounds like a failure. It's like, who's going to watch that? All right, whatever.
I didn't think anything, anyone would, yeah.
And when they called me to release, they did the whole thing at the Mandalay Bay and everything, lining up. And the release, and Mom and Ellen were there. Mom and Ellen were there. And you weren't. I mean, you were there. You were just off signing autographs, and they told me this, and I'm just like, what? So, what do you mean they're signing autographs? Who? Is he getting subpoenaed? What the heck is going on? But as a DC guy right here is saying, you've had an effect, and that's something I really hope that. I mean, I really like this idea of creating awards and that. I mean, it doesn't have to be financial awards, although that's kind of the implied thing. Yeah, and if you're just giving out the best public history thing here's and hell, the easiest thing in terms of an award would be free conference pay, basically. You're getting an award, you don't have to pay for the conference.
But even without that, just an award, the whatever, the WHA award for a public, public
So
facing.
WHA does have a public history award. The problem is it is always given to a museum. It has never not been given to a
Yeah,
museum.
but you come up with something new. That's
Yeah.
the best YouTube video
Yeah.
of the year. Something that you can put on your CV.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Because,
exactly.
and Mark
and
has
that's like-
the right idea, because that works towards your tenure. I mean, because
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
what you need for tenure.
Yeah, I mean, like the melon, the AHA melon. I don't know what Canada, because Mark's up in Canada. I don't know what. Do you guys have like a Canadian Historical Society or something like that?
There probably is, but like a lot of the most of the funding comes from things. There's like the SHIRK grant, which is social sciences and humanities, and it's a national grant that gets awarded to people. So a lot of the money comes from government, government grants.
Because I mean, like ours are often government in a way, because we have a lot of stuff that goes through the endowment for the humanities,
Right.
But that is incredibly political.
Right.
Like, just to point to how political it has been, although it's actually become less political in recent years, but what it used to be, from 1986 to 1994, it was ran by Lynn Cheney, and her husband happened to be Secretary of Defense, and she was more famous than her husband while he was Secretary. I mean, eventually he become Vice President and Darth Vader wannabe, but like I mean, he actually likes that description, so there's that. But before he became Vice President, she was more famous than him because of her work with her very much politicizing the endowment for the humanities, and so it is that kind of government funding thing happens. It's just really difficult in the U.S. But regardless of funding and all that, regardless of any kind of award, the mere creation of an award, I just realized I'm contradicting myself by syntax, regardless of like monetary award or anything, but like just having an award, that's actually a really good idea, and I think that's something that we should push for as a HistoryTuber community. So that's kind of an interesting takeaway from this whole thing in terms of trying to change scholarly perception, but I also want to kind of move us towards the end on all this. So we've talked about a lot of things. We talked about like the issues, all the bigotry that's on the internet, but also like the benefits that make new media something different from old media. My dad here has talked about how he's dealt with public history from an old media perspective, and we are coming from a new media perspective, but also how we can learn from that, how we can gain from that, but also how we can build from that, how we can change the way history is engaged with, because ultimately nowadays old media is old. The front lines of history are no longer what's being shown on TV and movies. The front lines of history are right here on YouTube, and that has a lot of connotations with it. So I wanted to go as we wrap up to get everybody's kind of concluding remarks. What do you think is the main takeaway from this conversation, and what do you think we should learn? And I will go with Mark first, then my dad, simply because Mark, you're already on new media and that, and then my dad will come with the old perspective, and I'll wrap it all up.
So I guess I would say that not only do I think it's like there's a huge positive benefit for academia to become more aware of and more involved with new media, but I think there is a certain responsibility there, because the world is kind of happening online in a lot of ways. And as someone else I know has pointed out before, YouTube is the second biggest search engine in the world, right? You're going to search on Google, or then you're going to search on YouTube. And even if you're searching on Google, you're still going to get YouTube right at the top of your hits. So I think there is a responsibility for academics to make sure that there's good information out there, reliable information out there, because there's always, in any medium, whether it's new media or, traditional media, there's always going to be, crap history out there, and there's going to be misleading stuff and stuff that just goes for the lowest common denominator, and, just to get views or whatever. There's always going to be that stuff there. There's no way to get rid of it. So I think it's important to make sure that there is also reliable stuff out there. And, I think this benefits both sides of the equation. This is going to benefit not only the larger public to have a better, kind of free access to information, for people who can't afford to go to university or whatever. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't have, intelligent, useful information available to them. And at the same time, I think it really benefits, people who are doing the research to engage with the larger community, and to know how people are understanding things. And I think a lot of academics can become so isolated that they are ignorant of, how people are understanding history and what that might mean. So I think there, this is something that is really crucial at this stage to focus on and try and improve.
Yeah, I mean, like we've talked a lot about the fact that the public needs to just be engaged with, right?
Mm-hmm.
But my dad here has been engaging with the public for a long time. And so what is your takeaway from this entire conversation?
Okay, I obviously think it's a good idea. That's what I've done all my life, all my professional life. I think that the new media is a new media. It's another way of doing it, another way of engaging with the public. Every time we get a new media, people use it as a way of engaging with the public. When we got the printing press, we used that. When we got wider access to printing presses, we use that. I think back on the use of mimeographs in Soviet Russia, and the use of that to get information out. It's in every case we should take advantage of that. The use of anything to make available history to the public. What's interesting to me, and that's what we're talking about here, is how once we professionalized the history profession, we started closing in history and keeping it away from people. And through antiquarians and local historians, that sort of subverted the academic historians and took history back out to the people. And I kind of talked about that earlier, but didn't talk about it, I think, as well as I would have liked to. But I always believe in bringing good history, accurate history, well-researched history out to the public. I think that anything that we can do that will help open up the halls of academe and help bring those who do history with researching it well, with presenting history with access to the sources to the public for those who want to access it. Now, as I said earlier, we're not going to make everybody historians, but if we present it, and if you who are presenting it through this new media present it with access through lists of your sources and all of that, you will be presenting it in a way that those who are consuming it will be able to see the difference between the bad history that is always going to be available on YouTube and the good history that is being done by those history YouTubers that are using this medium in the way that it can and should be used. Because there are going to be bad ones out there. We need to have it used well, and then show people, okay, there is a better way of using this. And here is history that you can consume and check. That's the whole point. History, if done well, should be able to be checked.
Verified.
Yeah, verified, checked, whatever term you want. And here is where you can verify it. Here are the source materials that I have used to put together the story that I am now presenting. That is the important part of all of this, because it is going out to the world. It is not, well, to that part of the world that it is available to. We have huge areas, huge swaths of the world where we have some issues with, but it is out there. And that is something that is going to undercut some of the gatekeepers that are in academia today. And I think there's a certain positive to that. But I've been in the world of undercutting some of those gatekeepers for all of my career. And, while not everybody is trying to be gatekeepers on a negative level, they're trying to do it for good reasons. I still think that there's some problems to that. I think that this material is not owned by the gatekeepers. It should be available to anyone who wants to go out and do the research and read and learn. And that's what is now possible. And I hope more people, as they look at what you are doing and others will do, will see and be able to use this. The only real problem I have with all of this is a privately owned company.
Oh, yeah.
That is an issue in my mind, because that because that privately owned company has and does exercise control over this medium.
We really haven't had the chance to talk about like the platform specific problems, and there are an absolute ton of them. And I've been I
know you haven't talked about it. I know you have on some of your videos, rather vociferously, and I thought I would just be the one to say it. But the problem is when it is not a public medium, and it is not. It is a private medium. And a private medium, unlike the printing press and all of that once it's printed, it is out there. This can be taken down. And whether you like it or whether you don't, there have been a lot of things taken down. And if the medium doesn't like you, whether or not you like what's being said, it can be taken down. And that is the area that I think we have some real issues with. And that's where I will end.
You're absolutely right to point that out, and I kind of wish we had the time to talk more in depth about that. In fact, I feel like I ought to make like an entire chat just on
that could be a whole topic in itself.
Yeah, because that right. By the way, when I made that,
you probably shouldn't go into it now because it is a whole different one. But yeah,
I know. But I want to point out that when I made that video a while back, that was like, I think it's just titled like YouTube suppresses history or something like that. I made a very pointed thing to hashtag trust bust Google, and surprisingly enough, and it was kind of one of the few times that I kind of realized like, oh wait, I actually wield some power here. It was trending on Twitter, like hashtag trustbust at Google. I got trending on Twitter. Now there was an entirely cynical part of this entire thing. By the way, Dad, you're if you go like this to your camera real quick, you're out of focus.
Did that help?
It doesn't want to focus on you, but that's weird. But the
a little blurred.
Yeah, well, he's a bit of a Luddite, everybody. But I think that kind of comes with the profession, right? But we also wield a lot of power as, especially as we get bigger, on that kind of stuff, because to get something trending on Twitter like that, it had something like 2,000 tweets with hashtag trustbust Google, and I made that hashtag. And what was entirely cynical about this was, did you know that Google is currently in a trust busting lawsuit?
Yep.
I did that absolutely purposefully. I was absolutely trying to help their case.
You're not known to be political.
No, not at all.
But if you had been known to be political, you might very well have been taken down.
Oh, you mean political in that way? Yeah. Well, so there's a lot of problems that come with that, and I think we can definitely have another conversation on that altogether. But I think we need to wrap this up. We've been going for 3.5 hours now, and we've had a lot of good points, especially that idea of trying to create awards, the idea of whether or not we're bringing in more scholars to talk on our channels and that, and the idea that we specifically try to reach out, especially with people of color or women who are on YouTube, to try to get them into the HistoryTuber space once they are already starting to produce content, and really support their growth. All of that, those are great ideas that I honestly hadn't even thought of, and most of it. The collaborating with people, I have absolutely done that for a while. But like awards, that's something that I could have been advocating for this entire time, and actually like talking to people. I have plenty of contacts with that, and I wasn't. I just never thought of the idea. This is great. So I want to wrap up by just kind of talking about like what we went over, and then just kind of my takeaways. If you guys want to interrupt, just wave your hand or something. I'll see it. But I'm gonna full screen myself, and then kind of wrap up this whole thing. Talk about what we've already gone through, and what we will. Well, we got one more thing from DC guy. And apparently, Dad, we need to make a podcast. I mean, Dad, you need a podcast.
Yeah, we need to talk about it.
Yeah. But to wrap up on everything, just wave if you want to interrupt on all this. So today we've talked about the limits of new media, but also the what can be great about it, but especially how we can engage scholarship and get scholars to engage with us, whether that be creating their own channels, but also like joining us on YouTube through other means such as interviews and whatnot. The main things that we have been particularly thank you, Amber, have been, can we call them the revisionist awards? but and yes, we did get your super chats. We have not been paying too much attention to the live chat because we've been talking amongst ourselves. That's the whole point of this. So this we have been covering stuff as complicated as like just defining what like scholarship is and whatnot, to things as hard as like whether or not scholars even should be engaging with new media or media in general. We've talked a lot about how like old media isn't necessarily that different from new media. The only real difference is that you get that input, that you can self-publish with ease. You can get feedback with ease. In the newspaper days, if you put out an article in a newspaper and somebody didn't like it, they would have to write a letter to the editor, and then the editor would have to choose whether or not to print that as a letter to the editor thing. Now, yes, that has absolutely the same kind of feedback that you get on YouTube, but there's gatekeepers there, and it's also much more intensive. We've removed the gatekeepers. Anybody can publish on history, and that's also been the problem. Probably the biggest reason why there needs to be more scholarly engagement with new media is that there is so much misinformation out there because anyone can do it. You're going to get a ton of conspiracy theorists. You're going to get a ton of denialists and whatnot. Conspiracy theorists are a form of denialism, but we tend to think of denialism as like a worse form of conspiracy theory. But like, then there's also just like myth making, which isn't necessarily conspiracy theory or anything, but like there's just so much misinformation and disinformation. And while it is not necessarily the scholar's job to combat that, it is the scholar's job to inform the public. And informing the public isn't just, making a peer-reviewed paper in some, the American Historical Quarterly, the most popular journal, academic journal of them all. That has something like 12,000 subscribers. This channel has more than 200,000 subscribers. I've got more viewership than the most prominent academic journal in the land. And yet, part of the whole problem that we have discussed throughout all of this is that there's also this academic bias against this ivory tower idea that, how dare you say that we need to engage with the public? We put out the history, it is up to them to engage with it. No, it's not that simple. The front lines of history are still here on YouTube. And that's what we've been discussing this entire time. How can we get academics to do that? We've discussed really innovative ideas, such as making awards. I really like that idea, making awards for history content, but also reaching out to more diverse creators and that, and trying to promote more diverse history as a way to show people that there are ways of doing this stuff that that are not singularly minded, especially with people like with this complexion. And there are a lot of problems that come with that. We've hinted at a lot bigger problems from the platform itself, but we've also talked about things such as how we can use these things to use this feedback to benefit not only ourselves, but scholarship in general. Taking those comments and seeing where the public's at in that. That's a heck of a tool. So I think the greatest takeaway with all this is seeing YouTube as probably the greatest public history tool at our fingertips today. And that we need to come up with more ideas such as this making awards or reaching out kind of thing, that will engage more scholars in the craft. So hopefully this has been very useful to everyone. I want to give everyone else on the panel a chance to rebut what I said if I said anything wrong or add to it. You guys have anything extra to add or anything to correct?
No, just agreement.
Cool.
Yeah, I'd be there too.
I demand 100% agreement.
Well, you won't get that.
I mean, we have definitely had some disagreements here, and we talked about the role of politics in history, especially, has been where we've diverged the most. And but that's kind of the power of this medium, is that it gives us the ability to not only disagree with one another, but the comments to disagree, and to learn from that. That's ultimately what new media is that it's a two-way street. Anybody can publish on YouTube. Anybody can put comments in there. Now you have control over that, and some places have kind of unwarranted control, which is definitely a topic for another time. I'm not exactly sure if I like the idea of nationalizing YouTube, but I also don't really like the idea of it being in private hands either, and I just don't know how to square that circle.
Well, the problem is, if YouTube was what it claims to be, which is just a platform, it would be fine, but it is not.
Yeah,
so
it acts more as a publisher, and that's
exactly,
yeah.
And that's where it runs into problems. If it was only a platform, it would be fine. It isn't, and so it's either going to have to be a platform or it's going to have to be a publisher. If it's a publisher, it's going to fall under different rules.
Yeah.
And it's going to have to decide one way or the other, or the government is going to have to, because it's running into that problem overseas. It's already kowtowed to the Chinese. It's running into this.
Google has, not YouTube.
YouTube. Okay, Google, whatever. But it's going.
Google is a subsidiary of Google, but YouTube is not actually available in China. Well, in Hong Kong, but Hong Kong.
But in China, it's not available, so it has, and Google has, and so therefore it isn't. Yeah. So I mean, that's the problem that it has, and when you're.
But we don't need to get into the weeds about
exactly, and that's the issue that
it's an issue for another discussion.
Exactly,
but especially in terms of, I mean, this has been all about.
But what you've been saying, I agree with,
because we haven't even talked about demonetization and suppression either, and that's a whole nother issue. But that's only really an issue once you get to a certain size. Once you start getting 10,000 views per video, then you start having to worry about it. But really, up until that point, you're not really worried about it. So this has been more about people who want to join, and I think we've talked about quite a bit. And I think the biggest takeaway is that this is the front line. This is where historical interpretation is determined, not academia, not the ivory tower, not old media, but literally.
I don't know that you can quite take it that far, but what I would say is this is where it's bumping up against the public at this point. Mm-hmm. This is the front line where it's running into the public. It's
I see.
still,
yeah,
because where it's happening in the academic world is still within academia, because I think, Mark, in your world, interpretation is still happening within the academic world, and I think even Joseph, in your world, it's still happening within academia, but where it's coming out into the real world,
Western history's always been weird because
that's true.
Yeah,
and there it's bumping up against the real world, and academia is kind of bumping into the real world, and through YouTube, it's an interesting kind of amorphous land where interpretation is happening out in YouTube, and the academics are going to end up having to deal with that because it's happening out there. It's happening out here in YouTube land. And they're going to have to deal with what's happening in YouTube land, which is not quite the same, I think, on the medievalist level yet. I don't know how many medievalists are, putting it out there, but that may end up happening, where somebody comes out and starts with enough information, with enough scholarship, putting things out in the public land in YouTube and, taking on academic scholarship there and saying, well, here from my scholarship, this is what I think is the case. And then, somebody within, the ivory tower is saying, no, I don't have to look at that. And somebody's saying, well, I think you do because the scholarship is good enough. And it could get, because...
Oh, yeah. I mean, this book that I've been reading on Billy the Kid actually incorporates a bunch of blog content. Like, straight up people who have been like, well, I think I might have actually found the birth certificate that might actually be Billy the Kid. And it happens to be in, someplace in New York. And that's actually quite an upsetting thing to the scholarship in that. And and that's an academic book. I have my issues with this book because it doesn't actually include citation. That's a huge problem. But I think that's actually because of the publisher. We don't need to go into that. But anyways, the point being that, we can absolutely, new media can absolutely impact scholarship in a way that, if somebody wanted to be published on hey, look, I might have found Billy the Kid's, birth certificate. It's not publishable. That's not something worth publishing in an academic journal. Maybe something really obscure. I'm sure there's a Billy the Kid dedicated journal or something like that publishes every 4 years. But who cares? But when you put it on a blog, that gains traction. And same thing with YouTube. I mean, there's been a ton of things. We mentioned a little bit about how the whole Tulsa riot has been popularized because of that one Watchmen.
No one was aware of it.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how many people have acted like it's never been known. It's they had an entire commission of it that was started in 1982. But YouTube especially has this kind of communication power that scholars really need to take advantage of, be it through our already established channels such as mine or Mark's, or through creating their own content or anything along those lines. We aren't necessarily gatekeepers here, but we are also already fairly well established.
But you are popularizers in an interesting way. You are gatekeepers, but you are also popularizers. And I think Mark is a good example because of being in and I hate to say it this way, Mark, but a somewhat more obscure area of history. Mm-hmm. You are able to, because you do good YouTube, you can bring people into an area of history that most people are very unaware of. And I have for years said you cannot underestimate people's lack of knowledge of history. It is impossible to underestimate that in any area of history.
Probably the most cynical saying is to just be like, never underestimate the stupidity of humanity.
Well, you can say that too, but it's history especially, because think about your own knowledge of your own history. Tell me what you did six years ago on August 7th. You can't remember offhand. You'd have to think about it. The fact is we don't think that way, but the kinds of things you do are interesting and it makes people think, and all of a sudden they're going, I didn't know that. Well, that's interesting. Okay. Now, are they going to start reading books on medieval Europe? No, but they'll watch your videos. They'll learn a little bit more. Great. Joseph, your stuff, gee, I think I'll watch a 45-second video on the Venerable Bede. Okay, why not? As I've told you, when your mother and I walked into the Romanesque chapel that Bede was buried in, and I got excited because there's the Venerable Bede, and your mother thought I'd lost my mind. She didn't know who I was talking about, but he was buried there.
It's the Venerable Bede.
That's right. I was almost dancing, and but that's what YouTube can be. And if it's done right, if the histories are done well, and if the source material is available.
Oh, sorry.
You're making
my cat is attacking my feet.
I think you need to close this up. I'm heading off. Anything that gets people interested in history is a good thing. And if it's good history, it's a great thing. That's what should be done. And anything that can break open some entry into the tower, that's a great thing.
I am not a cruel lord of knowledge. This guy is. he is the cruel lord of knowledge. Is that right, Beast? And he's like, no, I'm now going to sleep. I was just attacking your feet, and now I'm going to pretend that nothing was happening. But
anyways, I need to head off to bed.
Yes. So we've been going for about 4 hours. Yeah. And this has been an incredibly productive conversation. I hope that everyone else got out of it what we got out of it. I actually have some ideas to move forward on some of this stuff, especially that whole awards idea of yours, Mark. That's like, I know some people I need to email tomorrow. Specifically, it's like that's just such a brilliant idea because it doesn't cost anything.
No.
Why not put a cat on the panel? He demands it, but he doesn't get it. We've talked about the need for it. We've talked for the need for scholarly engagement. The some of the problems, specifically the comments, not really like the platform stuff, but also the benefits of it towards the profession and possible ways of getting the profession to do that. So I think that is a good place to end it. If you guys have anything to add, go ahead and say it. Otherwise,
just that it's been a pleasure talking with all of you, and very nice to meet you, Mark.
Very good to meet you, Mark. I'm glad to meet you. And I'm glad that through this I've learned about your channel. I'm going to be watching it.
Well, thank you.
And also, for everyone watching, there are links to everybody's channels down in the description. So
but
be
not
sure
mine.
Maybe if we do end up creating a podcast, I'll add it to, then. Otherwise, everyone, I hope you have a good night. Bye.
Bye.
Good night.